Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're doing our Golden Age console stream. And with me, as always, is Mike.
Hi.
And we also have with us tonight, returning from previous roundtables, Forneia.
Hello from below.
And Kate.
Hello.
And joining us for the first time, this guy and I go way back here, back to the old days of the digital press forums. It is Earl Green of thelogbook.com.
Greetings, people of Earth.
So, glad to have you here, Earl.
Glad to be here.
So, we're just going to go ahead and dive in, basically. And also, Snarbass, the blocks on the left side are from Hero. Yes, they are. And as usual, the background was done by Bette. And I do like how she fit in the octopus from Name That Game. And hello, Tim. Glad you could join us.
Hello.
All right. So, everyone, volume sounds good?
I hear everyone.
Okay. How about you, Snarb? Can you hear us okay? We
I hope we can be heard okay.
I certainly hope so. Okay, good. And there actually is kind of a, well, it's not really gritty and it's not really modern, but it is a kind of a reboot. Artie for the Atari 7800. It's a homebrew done by Muddy Vision Games. And it's really good. Take my word for that.
It looked cool for what I saw of it, but knowing Snarb, I assume he was calling for something much in the vein of the 2009 Bionic Commando reboot, if I had to guess.
No, we don't need anything quite that gritty.
Oh, Lord.
Ah, well. Anyway, Earl's only going to be with us for...
just insisting on being the albatross in the room.
Yeah. So, anyway, as Earl is only going to be with us for a short time tonight, compared to how long these things can usually run, I think we should go ahead and kick things off with him and the Odyssey 2. So, Earl?
Yeah, thank you. The Odyssey 2 is a very interesting... I don't know if you want to call it a dead end or a cul-de-sac. It's a system that... there were plans for it to go further, and it went no further. But really, the defining feature of it is it had a keyboard. And keep in mind, this is a video game console that came out in '78. But it had a full alphanumeric keyboard. Now, a membrane keyboard, because I think they were worried about, too many moving pieces, too many mechanical pieces to put a real keyboard on it. So it's a flat keyboard with contacts underneath the surface. Some of those keyboards are still intact, some are not. But the neat thing was that while they tried to sell the keyboard as we're going to have educational games, and therefore we are wholesome, mom and dad, buy us, and not those other guys, which are just games where you shoot things up, I'm not really sure that worked well as a sales pitch, because we all still wanted to shoot things up.
Yeah.
But they found ways to work the keyboard into the non-educational games as well. There was a series called the Challenger series of games, which they usually had some extra memory. I guess they did a little bit of bank switching in there. And they had a high score thing at the bottom of the screen with 6 characters. And, you could put your name or whatever derogatory statement you wanted to in there if you were playing with your older brother. But hey, enough about my experience with the Odyssey 2. In some games, such as Casey Munchkin and Casey's Crazy Chase, you could edit a level and then play it, which I believe that was, as far as consoles go, I'm pretty sure that was the first level editing feature on a console game. And there was also a game called Monkey Shines, where you had to edit the level live as the game was in progress. It was part of the strategy to delete parts of this structure that these monkeys are climbing up and trying to get to you and the other player.
Is that like how it's actually like frameworked as opposed to like, oh, blow up this section or whatever? Is it actually just like manipulate this element to be somewhere else?
You could delete pieces of the maze because it's sort of like a very simple jungle gym kind of thing. It's built out of grid elements. The Odyssey 2 had a built-in character set that it was very difficult to step outside of. That was kind of one of the trade-offs for it not having flickery graphics like other consoles did. Other consoles, which were perfectly fine, and I also played and enjoyed, I should point out. So I'm not trying to throw lots of shade there.
Isn't that where the little Odyssey 2 guy came from?
Yes. The little Odyssey 2 guy was a built-in element of the game. They had built-in characters of him walking and standing still or, facing front, walking in either direction. And so that saved... The idea was that this would save the game programmers a lot of time. As time wore on, actually, what they discovered was that it kind of limited them, and so they had to do lots of extra legwork to create custom characters. Like Casey Munchkin was sort of the Odyssey 2's response to Pac-Man. There was no Pac-Man-like character built into the character set.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Casey Munchkin is, I think, like, the only thing I actually know about the Odyssey 2. Wasn't he, like, sort of the unofficial mascot and, like, sort of the forefront, like, Mario before Mario, kind of the intended character meant to sell the game, or am I off on that assumption?
I believe that was probably the intent, but the problem was that Atari did not like other companies taking Pac-Man clone games to market. They sued everybody under the sun.
Yes, all the lawsuits. I remember reading about those.
So many.
Sounds like Nolan's MO, yeah.
Wait, was he even involved with Atari at the time?
And Nolan was gone by then. This was Warner Brothers.
Well, I am dumb. Continue.
No, I mean, it's... I'll put it this way. Nolan made business decisions I wouldn't have made, but also so did Warner Brothers, and literally every manager that Warner brought in to sit on top of Atari.
Yeah, that's... I mean, I would say... business hasn't really changed that much, has it?
No,
not really,
not in the
no.
slightest.
Anyway,
It's an Atari tradition, TM.
Yeah.
Whatever Atari even is nowadays.
We're all just high-strung prima donna Atari fans. But the thing about Casey Munchkin is that as soon as it drew that lawsuit, it diverted the course of other things that were in progress. Pickaxe Pete was in the works at the time that Magnavox and Philips got sued over Casey Munchkin. And prior to that, Pickaxe Pete was Hammer and Hank. And then they decided, you know what? This other guy had a hammer in his game. Maybe we take the hammer away from Hank and call him something else.
Yeah. Might be a smart move.
The great thing is, it made for a better game.
Oh, cool.
Which, that's
all of the kind of near-beer arcade titles that the Odyssey 2 had really did feature interesting variations on their inspiration. UFO was kind of their response to asteroids. What I liked about UFO was that you had an aiming mechanism. You moved your ship around, and the aiming point would rotate around your ship. But the really cool thing about UFO was you had shields. And if you didn't feel like shooting the other ships or or whatever was standing in for the asteroids, you could go ram them. But then your shield is down for a second or two, and you're vulnerable, and you can get into lots of trouble like that. but man, it's just so therapeutic just going out there and just headbutting that stuff in space. Headbutts in space.
Nice. That's actually one of the few Odyssey 2 games I've actually played. I've played that, Pickaxe Pete, both Casey Munchkin games, and I think Computer Golf. See, where I learned about the O2 originally was from a book called The Winner's Book of Video Games by Craig Cuby. And he wasn't particularly kind to the console in that. I think he said that both Atari and Mattel were as worried about the Odyssey 2 as the Boston Celtics were about Boston College. And Computer Golf was one of the games he just ripped apart.
That's really funny because the original golf game for the Atari 2600, do you know what the programmer's brief was on that? Go play Computer Golf on the Odyssey 2 and copy it.
Wow.
And it's actually, it's less of a game than Computer Golf is, because the thing I love about Computer Golf is my dad was he fancied himself to be a, big shot golfer. But he, really, from what I observed, the few times he talked to me or, basically forced me to go, watch him play golf, was that there was a lot of beer drinking and not a lot of putting going on.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there. The thing about Computer Golf that is great is that if you knock the ball into a tree or into a sand trap or a water hazard or what have you, your little guy throws this absolute bit on screen. He starts throwing his club around and it's very, very primitive sound effects, but it's hilarious. Because all of a sudden, okay, now your little dude on screen has character.
And that's something he did not mention in his review of the game. Because I did not know this until now.
It sounds like he looked at the screenshot and made his judgment based on that, which is, it's a thing you can choose to do with a video game review, but I don't recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Incidentally, your description of drinking a lot of beer and not a lot of putting, that sounds like fishing also to my ear.
Yeah.
And, well, my dad was also into that, and that very, very consistent. Something very consistent there.
Now, switching tracks for a second regarding Pickaxe Pete. Wasn't that game played at the 1982 World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee?
Yes, it was. There was a big layout. They had a bunch of arcade-style kiosks, and it was the Great Pickaxe Pete Pickoff. And, to the point that they had... And it's kind of funny because now you think of this in terms of, this would be some sort of simulcast on the web. But at the time, obviously, there was no coverage, and yet they had an announcer there doing color commentary for every player who...
Oh, wow.
Who stepped up and played. And
Dang.
It's, a really, really early entry in the annals of esports.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I guess one could make that consideration. That's fascinating. I'm just thinking of, competitive game commentators that I've heard over the years. And, I'm over here just fantasizing, what would they sound like in this situation?
Meanwhile, all I can think about is that episode of The Simpsons where Bart and Milhouse and Nelson and Martin all go to Knoxville. Well, at least I knocked over the Sun Sphere.
The Sun Sphere.
I can think of at least two things wrong with that title. My favorite bit in the entire thing, just because I've actually seen that movie, but I digress.
Yeah, that was.
I haven't watched The Simpsons, so I have no idea what you're on about.
Uh-oh. Well,
yeah, we're not going to recap the episode right now, but it's funny that that's actually where this Odyssey 2, Pickaxe Pete playoff took place, and then it gets referenced in The Simpsons 15 years later. Except they never referenced the Odyssey 2.
Sadly, because that, from all accounts, that was one of the most interesting things there. It wasn't exactly the 64 World's Fair.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing about Pickaxe Pete is that, well, there's a lot of interesting things. It started out as kind of, okay, this is what we're doing in response to Donkey Kong. But instead of just copying Donkey Kong, the lawsuit kind of scared them into making a better game.
Good.
Hey.
With each level that you advance, one part of one of the levels on one of the horizontal levels on the screen disappears, and that changes the physics of the game. Because instead of barrels, you have these 3 doors out of which boulders emerge, and they roll down the maze. And if they hit one of these gaps, all of a sudden there's some kind of gravity failure, and the thing is likely to bounce back up at you and kill you as it is to keep falling.
Wow. I clearly have not played the game enough to see this.
When it comes to like physics aberrations in this sense, I'm just thinking of the boulder from King's Quest.
Yeah, this would be right up there with that.
That's amazing. I want to see this now.
I'm glad Jungle Hunt didn't do that.
Jungle Hunt was hard enough without crazy physics.
Yeah.
But hey, you dig down into the earth. I guess gravity is not going to stay consistent, at least according to the Odyssey 2.
Yeah, this is true. Also, before we go on, just want to say out loud, thanks for showing up, Prime Up, aka Scroll Boss, and welcome to Great Way North.
Oi.
Hey.
Glad to see you guys here.
Welcome.
So, going on about the Odyssey 2 a little bit, I actually had an experience in the early 90s, I think it was. There was a thrift store up where I used to live, and I'd gone up there one day, and they had a whole bunch of Odyssey 2 games in a system. So, they wanted like $5 for it. The whole thing, and there was a ton of games in there. So I picked it up, got it home, hooked it up, nothing worked. So it's like, I just wasted $5, I guess. So anyway, the console and the games got shoved under my brother's bed for the longest time, and at one point they disappeared. I think he just got tired of them being there and threw them out. Wish he hadn't. Because I've actually had an opportunity to play the Odyssey 2 in the years since, and those games would have come in handy.
Now, was the voice module included with that batch?
I don't recall seeing it.
Okay. The Odyssey 2 was one of the games that was out in this era when add-on voice modules were bringing speech synthesis to the console realm. And oftentimes the speech synthesis was kind of incidental to the game. It wasn't mission critical. And that was certainly the case with the Odyssey 2 because they couldn't be sure that everyone was going to pick up, the $142 voice box or
Ouch.
something along those lines. $142 in $1982. That's a lot more money now.
Yeah, I'll say.
And, all of this to make it talk occasionally. And so they weren't sure what the consumer uptake or adoption rate was going to be on the voice module. And so it couldn't be integral to the games. However, there is one game that absolutely is not the same without the voice, and that is Smithereens. The Smithereens is a game where you have 2 castles, and they are at opposite ends of the screen horizontally. There is a moat or a lake of some kind in the middle. Behind each castle, there is the little Odyssey 2 guy, little Odyssey 2 human, with a catapult. And you hold back on the joystick, and you have to hold it down and then let go of it. And that how long you hold the joystick back determines how much push the projectile gets from your catapult. You know, you could accidentally hit your own castle with it. You could throw that object into the lake harmlessly. You could hit the other castle. You can overshoot the other castle and hit the other player directly, and that takes them out of commission for a moment. This is a two-player game with no one-player option.
Oh.
If you hold it too long, you launch it into low Earth orbit, and the International Space Station has to move out of its way. But the thing that the voice brings to this is that it is trash-talking both players constantly in this. There were two voices in the voice module. One was phenome-driven, and it was kind of a robotic voice. If you held it up to, if you put the TV speaker up to a box fan, it would have made a passable Dalek.
Wow.
But there was a canned voice with pre-recorded words, and I would describe this voice. In some games, like the educational games where it was used, it was soothing. It was very professional announcer. Your next word that you need to spell is this. But then you get into games like Smithereens and Casey's Crazy Chase, and it's like a demented game show host. And so you're trying to line up your shot with this catapult and take out the other player, take out their castle. Because the way that you advance a level, because it's best out of 10, the way you advance a level is to take out every brick of the other player's castle. But the whole time, this voice box is sitting on top of your machine with its own speaker independent of the TV, and it's just bellowing at you, "Come on, turkey, hit it!"
I gotta hear this in action.
Yeah, that sounds pretty great.
I have never... I had my, and I still have my Odyssey 2. It's not the same one that I had as a kid, because there was a whole thing with a tornado, and a bit of the roof got peeled back, and there was some major water damage to everything I owned.
Ouch.
And so I had to replace the Odyssey 2
Oof.
because it was out in the living room whose roof got peeled back a little bit. But the thing is even in the 90s, I had that machine sitting out, pride of place, hooked up, ready to be played, plugged in and played at any time. And I would have people come over, who were, "Oh, you have an N64? You have a PlayStation? Oh, you have one of those that I've never seen before and have no memory of.
You have this anomaly. Please explain it."
Yeah,
You have a
exactly.
prop from Buck
My
Rogers
conversation
of the 25th
piece.
century. Yeah, I mean, it looked like a prop from the Buck Rogers TV show from 1980. But if I plugged in Smithereens and just gave them a real quick primer on how to play it, and then put joysticks in everyone's hands and let them loose on it, man, it's a party. I mean, that game never failed to break the ice.
Oh, jeez.
Almost sounds like that sort of a short-lived early mid-90s craze of VHS board games, and how, like, without fail, the host would always say, "What is your name?" "That name is stupid." That's sort of the vibe I get from that. Smithereens just dumping on you.
I'm just over here thinking about it in terms of, yes. Welcome to my home. Everyone's a turkey here.
And all I can think of now is something similar, party-wise. I remember back in the early 80s, copy of Warlords, 4 paddles. And
Yes.
Yeah. That was a fun time.
Good times. Good times all.
Yep. Yeah, I just wish I'd known somebody who actually had an Odyssey 2 back in the day, so I'd probably appreciate it more now if I did. So, unfortunately, that was never in the cards for me. Neither was the ColecoVision or the Atari 5200.
Yeah, I can't say I ever owned an Odyssey 2 or even saw it in the wild, so that's unfortunately why I don't have a lot to say about it, but I do have a question for Earl, if that's okay. Let me think if I can phrase it right. Do you think the Odyssey 2 would have had more success if Atari wasn't always on their ass, or do you think it was just kind of doomed to fail by nature for whatever reason?
To a certain extent, I felt once you got into, once you got past those first couple of waves of Atari games, and then once you had Activision out there proving that the 2600 could play games that looked awesome and weren't flickering enough to trigger an epileptic seizure.
Yeah, that too.
Not that anyone understood what that was yet.
No.
Yeah, true. Yeah, they were more worried about, it's going to burn into your TV tube, because this was a thing that actually was a concern at the time.
I've seen enough arcade monitors with burn-in.
Exactly.
Oh boy. Yep.
Good old X-Men. It's huge ass triple monitor.
I think it would have behooved Philips, Magnavox, anyone to pursue two things. More arcade ports. There is literally one licensed arcade port that was produced by Philips itself for the Odyssey 2, and that was a super obscure Konami game called Turtles.
Yes, I remember reading about this.
Which I'm actually fairly fond of Turtles. I'm not crapping on Turtles here, but
I just think it's a little ironically funny because of the very popular license involving turtles Konami would eventually get a hold of. But
good point.
Yeah, it's it was not considered a priority for them to spend their money on licenses, because I think there were 3 licensed games for the Odyssey 2, and only one of them was an arcade title. The other 2 that they had to buy rights for were P.T. Barnum's Acrobats, which was basically the same game as Circus Atari.
Huh.
Which all of that goes back to a 1976 arcade game called Clowns or Circus, depending on who was ripping off whom. But it's the same game at all times. It's a variation on Breakout. You're using your paddle to move the seesaw around and trying to catch the little person who's up in the air popping balloons, and eventually they're going to run out of balloons to pop, which somehow keeps them afloat. Don't ask me about the physics on that. That's right up there with Pickaxe Pete and his subterranean boulders. But eventually the other person comes down. You have to catch them. You have to land them on the open end of the seesaw and launch the little humanoid figure on the other end. P.T. Barnum's Acrobats was just that game, except, again, the voice was trash-talking you. Or commiserating with you. I remember, one phrase that shows up in my sessions of P.T. Barnum's Acrobats more than any other is, "Oh, no." It's like, yeah, you got that right, buddy. Been saying that ever since I put the cartridge in the slot.
So I got a question for you about that one. Since you mentioned it was pretty close to what Circus Atari is, so does that mean when you miss the little guy jumping around, does he splat and twitch like the dude in Circus Atari?
He just flattened into the ground.
Oh, so his legs don't twitch or anything?
Yeah. There's I don't recall there being any twitching. I haven't played that one in a while. It's not a favorite. To my memory, it just flattens the humanoid figure down to where it's just like a head on feet.
Okay, that's actually almost as funny.
Cartoon physics, classic cartoon physics.
Yeah.
The other thing that they got rights to was a toy line, also a comic book called Power Lords. And this was the last domestic game that Philips Magnavox produced for the Odyssey 2 before giving up on it. Somehow getting the rights to the Power Lords toys was going to be a viable thing. It is the rarest first-party game for the console, but here's the cool thing. Unlike a lot of really rare games for other systems, it's fun. It's really fun.
So, which one was this called again?
Power Lords.
Power Lords. Yeah, I remember reading about that too, but again, I've never played it. I'll have to look that one up. But I do have another question for you. I recall reading about these games that were basically a combination of video and board games. Stuff like, was that one? The Great Wall Street Fortune Hunt, I think, was one of them.
Yes, that one where that's actually the worst of the bunch. There were 3 of them in total. There was going to be a 4th one, but the 3 that were released were Quest for the Rings, which was the best one. They could have stopped there, and it would have been great.
Okay.
Conquest of the World came after that, and basically that's air-sea battle with a board game. Doesn't that sound fun?
No.
No? Okay. Just sorry, a failure on my part to read the room.
Yeah.
And then the Great Wall Street Fortune Hunt, which was I never really got the point of it.
That just sounds even less fun.
That sounds like some sort of corporate bullshit, like authorized by Warren Buffett or something. Like, wow, I want to play a game about Wall Street because I'm a working class Joe stuck in the lower middle existential hell. Yeah, fuck off.
Hey, what about
exactly?
What about Wall Street, kid?
Oh no, don't get me. Not a game I like.
Me either.
Endorsed by J.P. Morgan.
Jesus Christ.
Anyway, welcome into the stream, Elle and Brandon. Glad to see you both here. So, yeah, I was always curious about those games. Not curious enough to really look them up or want to buy an Odyssey 2, but...
Quest for the Rings was really interesting because, first off, the manual for it totally copped to the fact that we're doing an unlicensed game of Lord of the Rings with D&D trappings. Which
that sounds very lawsuity.
Which, you know, most of us would be like, hell yeah, I'm in right now. But it actually made use of the board game elements, as this is almost kind of like D&D miniatures in a way, as in this is how the game master, who has control of the keyboard, and the keyboard figures into this heavily because this was the one Odyssey 2 game that had an overlay for the keyboard that would let the game master select what kind of dungeon you were going into next. And that was predicated upon supposedly random placement of certain coins and tokens on the board.
JRR tokens. I'll shut up forever now. Actually, I'll give myself one of shit. Continue. There you go.
Okay, you get a quack.
Self-duck in Satanga.
Oh yes, I deserved it.
Quest for the Rings was really the best of those because it can be played... Okay, to be sure, they can all be played without the game board to varying degrees. It's just the Wall Street Fortune Hunt is barely a game without the board. Conquest of the World, you play it without the board, it's air-sea battle. and I think also submarines, if I remember correctly.
Didn't Air Sea Battle also have submarines?
I think, yes, it did.
Well.
But the Quest for the Rings, you could play that just the cartridge by itself, just get 2 players around, and it's a fun one because even though it is pre-voice module and does not, sadly, trash talk you, you wind up trash talking each other because there's a level with a dragon that one player is basically going to be the sacrifice while the other player sneaks around to get the ring and advance to the next level. That is how the dragon level plays out. You know, someone is not making it out of that alive.
Wow. Many years before Valve did a similar thing in Left 4 Dead. That's all I can think of for some reason.
Question, is that like actively a mandate, or is it just, you know, oh, I'm going to be the distraction, oh, I screwed up, I'm dead?
Well, I mean, there are character classes within the game. This is kind of where the D&D-ishness... I just invented a really clumsy word.
We understand.
But that's where it comes into play. Each player selects their character. Are you going to be the fighter? Your power is, I have a sword. Which, not much of a power, but hey, I have a sword.
Hey, worked for me, man.
the wizard can shoot asterisks at things and kill them or immobilize them.
I want to fire asterisks every day.
We all do.
Yes.
I do on my keyboard, I can tell you that.
You fire Cubertees and you know it.
That too.
Hey, I'm the Cuberties guy here.
And I'm trying to remember the other two character classes. One could walk through walls, which is great until you get to one of the levels where the walls are made of lava. Then that's not a good thing to walk into. It's the damnedest thing you've ever seen. But there's only one way to find this out.
As someone with a tabletop background, offhand, I'm inclined to think Thief and Cleric would be the other two, because those are like the classic four: Fighter, Thief, Cleric, Wizard. Well, Magic user back then.
And there was another one who had their power is I have a cloak of invisibility. I have absolutely no offensive capability whatsoever, but I have a cloak of invisibility. The problem is that the player can't see their own character.
Oh no! It's the Cloak of Darkness from Wizards and Warriors 1.
Oh
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am the Clown Prince of Darkness, and
reptile-ass move.
Yeah, you walk into things without even realizing. Oh, well, shit, that's where I am.
See, all I can think about is the opening to the old D&D cartoon. Right, where a dungeon master goes and gives them all their classes and whatnot.
Homestar dressed up as him for one of the Homestar Halloweens.
Nice. I don't remember if I saw one or not.
A VTuber friend of mine, actually, who goes by MechaGM, basically has like a robo head frame and robo arms and the dungeon master cloak. Because he's the GM and he runs a lot of tabletop D&D in particular.
If it works.
Has been doing so since he was like 10 or something.
Cool.
From original Dungeons and Dragons. Huh. So it's an Erd name.
Well, it works then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Earl, another question for you, since most of us here haven't had a lot of experience with the Odyssey 2. What would your personal recommended games be for this?
Just about anything in the Challenger series is best of class for that system.
Okay.
Because those were the games where they were consciously kind of walking 75% of the way toward a popular arcade game that you know, so that's a good starting point. And then they hang a sharp left and go right through the guardrails and take it someplace else. Like Casey Munchkin, for example, the dots, there are fewer dots than there are in a Pac-Man maze, and they do not sit still. They move around on their own. They are trying to get away from you. You don't want to be eaten by the monsters. The dots don't want to be eaten by you.
If the pellets can actually move around, that kind of raises a bit of a, are we the baddies kind of thought.
Yeah, is this a life form? It's, it's the circle of life. But it's the great thing about Casey Munchkin is that the character came back in a game after the lawsuit called Casey's Crazy Chase.
Yeah, this was the one with the, what was it called? The Dratterpillar, I think?
The Dratterpillar, which is basically, try not to read too much into this. There's a centipede-like creature that you have to start eating from behind. There is no way to say that without it sounding
human centipede, human centipede.
No, please don't.
Okay, Mike.
But
yeah,
10,000 quacks with a wet noodle.
Yeah.
I'll just take that for now.
Yeah, there was probably a better way to phrase that, but the thing that you can't overlook is that Atari just sued the original game with this character off the market. So now this character is going to come back and kill a centipede.
Yeah.
As you do.
There's no symbolism there whatsoever.
Nope. As I'm sitting here looking at my centipede cab.
Mm-hmm.
By Atari, I think, was a company that made it.
So one hears.
Yes. Any specific games you'd recommend? I know you mentioned Smithereens, UFO, the Casey Munchkin games, obviously. And
yeah, Smithereens is fun but with the voice module, it's an absolute riot.
Nice.
Casey Munchkin, definitely worth seeking out. And by the way, just a little bit of collector talk. Now, I gave up. I got out of the collecting game a long time ago because I have much more fun just playing stuff now than I do worrying about collecting the slab of plastic that contains the circuit board. And, I realize there may be some legal or ethical gray areas there. I don't care.
I don't either. In fact, Rob and I had a mini roundtable about this not too long ago, more or less.
Yes, we did. Retro Inactive. It's in the archives. Anyone wants to watch it that missed it.
Yeah, it should be about the love of the game, not getting, pretty labels to put up on a shelf forever.
Exactly.
Yeah. No argument here. The flip side of that is that with the Odyssey 2, the emulation for it is far from perfect. It sounds off, the speed is off, and it's just never quite right. This is a case where I recommend playing it on original hardware. Track down the console. The console, not that difficult to find. The voice module, slightly more difficult to find, but they're out there. Now, when it comes to sourcing a cartridge of Casey Munchkin, do not let anybody punk you and overcharge you for that, because they produced a shit ton of these. They are not difficult to find. They're not worth $100.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Good.
The only game that you should worry about paying a lot for is Power Lords. If you're looking for a complete collection. Like I said, it is the rare intersection of rare and fun. It is definitely not Chase the Chuck Wagon or Air Raid.
Right.
Neat. What were you saying, Kate?
Yeah, Kate, you got a question?
Does a flash card exist for this system?
There is a multi-cart. Now,
Okay,
I
that
know
sounds good.
a flash cart, I don't know. I have heard of people trying to develop flash carts or, carts with, an SD card slot or something like that. And then I never hear about it again, or it's something like, oh, I made 20 of them and that's it, because it's too difficult to get the cartridge casings, because it's a fairly unique cartridge casing.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to gut another game to do it.
That's a shame.
Ouch. That just makes you think of all those Ball Blazer carts for the 700 that died for their pokies.
Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
exactly.
And also, I see Rex has joined us. So, welcome, Rex.
Welcome.
Now, there is an active homebrew scene for the Odyssey 2, driven mainly out of South America, because the console was huge there. It was like Atari huge in South America.
Interesting.
I did not know that.
It was a territory that Philips was able to get the game to market at a reasonable price, and it was not a territory that Atari or Mattel or Coleco were necessarily chasing. A lot of not really homebrews, but kind of after the fact conversions of arcade ports for the ColecoVision come from the MSX computer, which was also a big thing in South America.
Yes.
And those games did not make it up here because MSX was not a platform that ever really got any kind of purchase in the American market.
Nope.
But it's a stone's throw away code-wise and processor-wise from the ColecoVision.
That's right.
And so you see a lot of arcade ports, like there's a decent port of the arcade game Flicky, where you're a little bird and you are, trying to lead your baby birds away from all these cats trying to chase them. That started out as a game on the MSX computer platform. Someone ported it to the ColecoVision with minimal effort.
That happened with Gradius, too, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I've kind of lost track of how many Coleco homebrews are actually ports from existing MSX software.
Yeah,
but anyway,
fun.
Thumbnail sketch of the South American and especially Brazilian video game scene. The Odyssey 2 has quite a following there. It's just known as the Odyssey in that market. They are working on producing new 3D printed cartridge casings.
Nice.
So the really neat original 70s and 80s cartridges, which had a handle that you could pull out and push in, would have been nice if anyone outside of whoever it was who made Air Raid for the 2600 had ever thought of that.
Yeah. That weird.
Because the handle is,
T-bar thing.
no pun intended, but here it is. It's handy.
Also, just real quick, I see Sharon and the Text Arc have joined us. So, welcome.
Hey, the Text Arc.
Wait.
Welcome.
So, any of the Challenger games, if you get a voice module, any of the arcade-style voice games, the educational games, if you're going for a complete collection, by all means, chase down Nimble Numbers and Ned and Sid the Spellbinder, but they're not library essentials. A lot of the attempts at educational games on the Odyssey 2,
Educational
not
games.
that
That's
great.
really all you need to say.
It's all in the title, yeah.
I loved the one thing called Keyboard Creations, which they intended like, you put your TV in a shop window and you can put scrolling messages and you don't have to buy an expensive scrolling message board. As if a TV was not expensive back in those days. I call it the public access cable channel simulator because basically all it does is it lets you put a scrolling message on 1/10 of the screen.
That's it.
That's it. The rest of it, pick a background color. Okay, that's the whole rest of the screen except for the little window at the bottom where there's a clock.
Wow.
But you've got this one-line message that's scrolling forever until you hit the reset button and start over again. It's the cable access channel simulator, showing you what cable access TV looked like in 1979.
Well, I guess that's at least historically accurate.
Yeah. So there is that. Some of the sports games are actually really good. Computer golf and baseball, I would swear by those. Those are excellent. Odyssey 2 Baseball was my favorite baseball game until either baseball on the Game Boy or baseball in Wii Sports. That is how long it was before a video baseball game came along that caught me the way that Odyssey 2 Baseball did.
That's actually pretty impressive.
The thing about a lot of Odyssey 2 games is a lot of them are two-player games with no one-player option. The Challenger series is kind of unique in that you have a one-player option. But a lot of them require a second player. Smithereens requires a second player, but that's great because you're both going to be laughing your asses off while playing it, while this insane voice in a box is insulting both of you. And so that's totally worth inviting people over and, having to put on, like, pants, I think they call them today.
Don't you hate pants?
Sing
Thanks,
the
Harlan.
praises of pants.
Now, I do have one other question.
Yeah,
when
go
you're
ahead.
done. But since a lot of people may not know about the existence of the Odyssey, which, if I remember correctly, was a dedicated Pong unit, right?
Yes, it's dedicated, and it has... Now, there's still an active argument, depending on who you ask, was this the first programmable game system? It has different cards that come with it, 6 of them in total. But basically, they are just keys that activate different combinations of things that are built into the console.
Okay.
And that's the Odyssey, or, if you want to call it this, the Odyssey 1. It also had, the only graphics it could generate were 2 or 3 moving squares. And so for anything else, you had to put this semi-transparent overlay on your TV screen. And that was the graphics.
Yeah, I've seen videos of the thing in motion. It requires a fair dose of imagination to to get the most out of it. I don't know. That sounds condescending.
Yeah,
I mean,
we were
hey, it was
loaded
the
with
technology at the
imagination
time.
back then.
Yeah, he had a lot more of it before everything spoiled it.
I have.
So
It's kind of like
Oh,
what
go
was the
ahead.
game we were talking about before the show, Alien Invaders Plus, where
Yes.
the cover art is this Lovecraftian horror descending from space, and it not only is it like have 4 dragon heads on this reptile body, but the reptile body has a city in a dome mounted to it.
wow.
I guess that was optional. Like you could have gotten a sunroof. No, I got a city.
Exactly. But yeah, in game, it looks like some kind of a giant space crab.
Yeah, in game, it's basically the Odyssey 2 version of Space Invaders, except instead of the mothership, the thing on the cover art is depicted by this little red. I think it's 2 sprites wide, and it's kind of kit bashed together from the existing character set. But it sits there and waves its tentacles. If you kill all of the invaders, rather than automatically advancing to the next level, the space crab gets pissed off at you and attacks. I mean, it comes down to your level and starts trying to kill you.
Yeah, didn't they call it the Merciless Monstroth, I think?
Yeah, I think that's what they called it on the box. Now, my mom, whenever she and I were playing this, every time that thing, descended from the heavens to finish you off personally, she was like, space crab! And so that's what it is for me forever. It's space crab.
Well, it's a lot easier to say than Merciless Monstroth, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously didn't focus group that name.
No.
You ask anybody, that's a space crab.
Exactly. It's interesting to actually explore this stuff, and it's also nice to know that playing it via emulation, I'm not getting the real experience here because it's so spotty.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that no one has. The guy who programmed the original emulation core is named Dan Boris, and I don't ever want to sound like I'm pissing all over Dan Boris's work. Okay, but there was an original version of Stella that was not quite ready for prime time. People kept improving on it.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of maddening that the Odyssey 2 community, or the Video Pack community, it was called the Video Pack in Europe. And in France, I believe it was called the Joe Pack. And was it in Italy? It was called the Radiola Jet 25 or something like that.
Yeah, that's a name.
It has a lot of names, and there are some European variants that have built-in screens and built-in monitors, and those things look awesome. I would hate to try to get one shipped to the United States intact.
Yeah.
Were those monitors LCD or CRT or?
Oh, very, very CRT. We're talking about 1979, 1980 that these came out. And I mean, they look like a sci-fi prop, straight out of the box. I've seen one in person once at Classic Gaming Expo, and now I kind of want to go back in time and tell myself, okay, every dime you brought, just buy that and take it home. Except, it would have had to have survived the plane trip in luggage or a box or something. And I just, bring it over on the boat. Don't do it any other way.
Exactly.
I would hate to try to see one of those survive the trip.
And then hope the boat doesn't sink.
It's an unfair universe out there.
Yeah. But, regarding what we were talking about earlier about imagination, I've actually given a few talks to elementary school classes about writing. But since I write about video games, I talk about that. And one of my favorite examples to give is, and I know it's not Odyssey 2, but Adventure for the Atari 2600. I mean, come on, your hero's a square. I'll say something like, okay, now when you guys think of like a video game hero, you think of like maybe a knight with a sword or a Pokemon master or something like that, right? And they're all like, yeah. So you want to know what our heroes looked like back then? I draw the square. They're like, that's a square. It's
That's
like,
pretty great.
no, that's a hero. Here is his sword. And I draw the arrow.
That's adorable.
The best one, though, is always getting them to try and guess what the dragon is. I've heard everything.
That duck away from me.
I was going to say, get that.
Yes. I've heard duck, seahorse, man. It's like, no, that's a dragon. But they're always interesting. I actually brought in visual aids, too. Some cartridges from back in the day. And they just get a kick out of looking at these things. They're like, this is a video game? It's like, hell yeah, it is, Junior. But yeah, it's always fun talking to them, especially, and this is just something I do just to catch them off guard. It's like, introduce myself, and I'll be like, yeah, I've written several books, and what I write about, and I look around the room real quick and pick something. And it's like, I write about furniture, good steady furniture, like your teacher's chair here. Yep, can't beat a good chair like that. And you can just see they're all like, oh God, no. and then I hit him with, just kidding, I write about video games. And then it's like an explosion goes off.
That's adorable.
Oh, yeah, because they're all telling me, oh, yeah, I love this game. I love this game. This game is great. And I remember one of the first talks I ever gave, I mentioned that I worked with Namco on Splatterhouse. And this kid kind of, as I'm walking around the room showing off stuff, this kid kind of motioned me, leaning, I was like, I hope Namco's working on Tekken 7. I was like, they are. Don't tell anybody.
Well, he was right about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to dwell on the sidebar, but when that happens, how often would there be some sort of snot-nosed kid who only thought, like, Call of Duty all day, every day was the only game worth giving a shit about?
Well, see, now, if I had given that talk to, like, high school students, yeah, that wouldn't have worked. I was mainly talking to, like, first, second, and third grade classes.
Okay. Yeah. I guess most of them wouldn't have played that awful propaganda bullshit by then, unless they had really bad parents, but that's neither here nor there.
Exactly. So, I know you said you had to take off after an hour, Earl. So, anything else you wanted to add about the Odyssey 2 or anything else we're going to talk about in the immediate future?
There's a lot of love for it. There are multi-carts out there that have everything on them. Those are worth every penny because, unless your search is about lining up all the boxes on the shelf, this gives you everything to play, and that's the real value of it. You can look up the picture of the flying Lovecraftian thing with the city on its back. I'm assuming that's its back. If it's some other part of its body, I wouldn't recommend keeping a city there, but that's neither here nor there.
True.
Oh, so it's fine to put it on the back. That's up to OSHA code.
Yeah, or or it's Discworld, really. But that's, the whole world on the back of a turtle. Anyway, I
on
digest.
top of a turtle. Turtle's all the way down.
Golden Axe.
Yeah, and turtles are in a different game altogether. But there is a community out there for it. It's a fairly tight-knit community. Cool stuff comes out. New homebrews come out. Support those when they do. Those really are now the boxes worth lining up on the shelf.
Nice.
So thanks very much for having me. I've got to scram and have fun. Look forward to hearing what everyone else comes up with.
Oh, definitely. It's great having you here.
Yeah, definitely, man. Good to see you.
Everyone check out Earl's channel. I did link to it in the video description.
Yeah, new stuff comes out every few days, whether anyone is ready for it or not, and that includes me.
Yeah.
That's the spirit.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, in that case, hopefully talk to you later.
All right. Thank you very much again for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Glad you're here.
Have a good
Bye.
one.
Yep. Have a good
See
one.
you, duder.
Well,
So there were 4.
Yes. And so ends our Odyssey 2 segment. So now we're going to go into something that was a little more recognizable from the time. And this one I'm going to turn over to Forneia. Because she is going to be talking about Mattel's Intellivision.
Oh boy, howdy. So let's bear in mind here, this is a console that is something that predates my existence by a couple years. Not a lot, but a couple. But it was instrumental in my upbringing. So bear that in mind. I don't have any particular experience about, what it was like when it came out and that all kind of thing. It was very after the fact for me. But, I had played the Intellivision as well as, like the old Atari 2600 and other such things uh, before I played an NES. So bear that in mind about me.
Okay.
But yeah, so the Intellivision was a console that was released by Mattel. I don't know the history there.
I can only tell you what little I know.
Wherein,
So, which
yeah,
isn't much.
I can look it up on Wikipedia, but why don't you go for it?
It was a video game console that had a really crappy controller.
Oh, I could have told
Yeah.
you that.
Yeah, I was going to say, all I really know about the Intellivision off the top of my head is its remote control of a...
Like I was over here talking
Thing.
about the Jaguar last time I was here, and we specifically incited the Intellivision. I know that part.
But I will say, much like the Odyssey 2, it also had a voice attachment. It was the IntelliVoice.
I was going to get into that.
Oh, I
I
fully
was going to
expect you
get
to.
into that.
And there was also a later version of the console called the Intellivision 2, where I guess the original controllers were hardwired into the console, and I guess the Intellivision 2 you could actually unplug them. At least, I might be remembering that wrong. I do.
You can do that because the Intellivision 2 is the one that we had.
Yeah. So was I right or was I wrong?
Yeah, you can unplug them, so you could theoretically, replace them if need be.
Nice. Now, one other thing I could tell you about it is that since I was there when it came out, I did actually know a couple of people who owned it, and I did get to play it, just not very much.
Right.
So I remember specifically playing over at a friend of my parents had it, and my dad and I played. It was some kind of a sub battle game. I can't remember what it was called.
That might be Sea Battle.
You might be right about that. Yeah, Sea Battle sounds about right. And a little later on in the early 90s, a friend of mine had made...
Oh, it could be Sub Hunt, actually, when I stopped to think about it.
Crap, you're right. There's 2 games about subs and seas and stuff. A friend of mine in the early 90s actually had it as well. He didn't really use it much of the time, but one time he hooked it up and he had the game Dracula for it. That game was
Oh,
neat.
boy.
Magic. Oh, yeah. Plus, my friend Bromley, who'd been on a couple of the streams before, he had an Intellivision as well. And I remember he had a couple of the Magic games, too, like Microsurgeon. Which, that was a fascinating game. I had no idea what to do in it, but it was fascinating.
Isn't that always the way?
Yep. So, that's pretty much all I can tell you about it. So, go right ahead and continue.
Mm-hmm. So, one thing I can say, keeping on the controller for a little bit, because, the phone pad that the Jaguar had, where you had, a phone-style arrangement of digits 1 through 9, an asterisk, a 0, and then a pound sign. Yeah, you've got that going on the Intellivision controller.
Yep.
In addition to that, it had a disc, an analog disc, as it turns out, as its primary form of movement. It wasn't a stick, it was a disc. And on the sides of the controller, you had these side buttons with 2 pairs that were weirdly spread apart. I don't know what they were thinking with that one. From what I've read, because I had the Intellivision 2, the original Intellivision, they were like rubber buttons. Whereas with the Intellivision 2, they're a hard plastic, and it's really hard to actually press them, especially when you're a 3-year-old.
Yeah. Well, my experience with Intellivision was always with the original model, so yeah, they were more rubbery on that. There is one little thing I remember, too, from that Winner's Book of Video Games I mentioned. The author had recommended that if you're a sports fan, you went with the Intellivision. If you were an arcade fan, you went with the Atari.
I can see that argument because As it turns out, the Intellivision had actual licensed sports titles such as NBA basketball, NHL hockey, PGA golf, NFL football, and then just tennis.
Yeah.
Wimbledon X20. I don't know.
No, just tennis.
Yeah, it was literally just tennis, Mike.
Yeah, this is back when you could get away with just calling your game boxing,
It is,
which you
yeah.
had, by the way.
Yeah. Rex
And
is right,
boxing
too.
and boxing is kind of wild because in order to throw punches, you have to like press those like awkward side buttons, but you
Yeah.
press the phone pad buttons to discern what kind of punch you're about to launch. So if you want to like do like a facial jab, I might be getting like the exact specifics wrong here, but like the concept is sound. It's like, okay, you want to do like, a face jab, then you press 1, and if you want to press like do like a medium like body jab, then you press like 4 or something like that, and like 5 is block, and I think that like 8 is high guard and 2 is low guard, or it could be that I could have that backwards. Right, this is a phone, so it's probably 2 is high guard.
Sounds like it was overly complicated for the sake of being overly complicated.
It was intending to be precise, and it ends up being very rough on the joints.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons I didn't like that controller.
But beyond that, it had a bunch of other wild stuff. One thing that's always fun to bring up is that it has several Dungeons and Dragons licensed games on it. We had 2 in particular. One was just Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. From what I've looked up, it eventually was also referred to as Cloudy Mountain or Crown of Kings. And this Dungeons and Dragons game is very strangely applied usage of the license, in that you have your Intellivision person, very similar to the Odyssey person that was being spoken of earlier, because you pretty much had like the universally looking Intellivision person.
Yeah, the Running Man guy.
And you're armed with a bow that you can't see, as I recall. And you need to traverse an entire territory that is comprised of like swamps and caves and rivers and like all other kinds of things. And each time you advance into one of those things, in order to actually proceed further, because it's like on kind of like an overworld map, it descends into this procedurally generated maze that's kind of rogue-ish.
I was going to say, well, early roguelike is stupid because those are popular now, like, Rogue was a thing that existed in the 80s, even the late 70s, so...
Well, the original Intellivision was a 79 racket, so,
There we go.
And this Dungeons and Dragons in particular is an 82 venture.
I distinctly remember playing one of those 2 games at Bromley's place. I just can't remember which one it was.
Oh, I'll get to the other one shortly.
Okay.
And your only means of defending yourself is with a bow, and to actually listen for where it is you're going, because it has an auditory component where, as you move through the whole place, you'll hear various like little sounds. Like if you hear like, that means there's like a bat nearby, or if you hear like, then there's like a snake, and that's gonna like go charging at you if you get close, and you have to snapshot it with your bow. And like there's all kinds of just like creatures lurking in the darkness that you can't see. And if they decide that they want to come for you, you need to be very quick on your trigger finger, and be ready to eat dirt. There's actually a requisite for some paths where it's like, oh, you want to cross the river? All right, you need to get the boat, and the boat is somewhere. And I think you need you need like a map or something to cross through the jungle or something. It has like more depth than you would expect, but it is pretty brutal. Very tense when you're young, and you don't really know how to like parse things like that correctly, though.
Yeah.
Just hearing all the scary monster noises.
Yeah, exactly. Just catch up with the chat real quick. I know Snarb mentioned that D&D game had actually inspired Dragon Buster 2 on the Famicom, and yes, I can see that completely.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon mentioned that ColecoVision had games that were released by Atari. This is something I want to get into a bit later, how it was a wild time, And then Snarb and Rex had both something to say about D&D. Original D&D was similar to Rogue, and then if your character died and could not be revived, you had to destroy their sheet. Ouch.
Yeah, that was a thing.
Yeah, see, I played D&D all of twice in my life. And once was when I was very young, and once was when I was a teenager. So, that's it.
Fair.
Yeah, but as far as the other Intellivision stuff I could think of, but I know Bromley had the IntelliVoice module, which I know you wanted to talk
Oh,
about.
I'll definitely be getting into that. I have every single IntelliVoice game, as it turns out.
Nice.
Wow.
I think he had a couple of them. I know he had B-17 Bomber.
Yup. Oh, I'll get there.
Yeah.
Boy, howdy, I'll get there.
And I definitely want to discuss some Magic's games as well, because much like their games for the 2600, they just really went all out with these games. And it was just so unique stuff, like I mentioned, Microsurgeon and Dracula, and also Beauty and the Beast, and a couple other ones I just can't think of.
Yeah, so the other D&D game that we had was Treasure of Tarman, which evidently is also known as Minotaur, wherein you actually have a first-person dungeon crawl. That's actually like, you don't actually have like your Intellivision person. It is genuinely first person. And you tap left or right on the disc to rotate your position and navigate a 12 by 12 procedurally generated maze. And there's all kinds of like equipment that you can pick up. There's bows that you can use to deal physical damage, or scrolls and tomes that you can use to deal magical damage. And it's a wild time. There's enemies that range from skeletons to big ants to scorpions, and the titular minotaur at the end.
Nice.
And it's actually really complicated. I'm not gonna, well, no, let me not complicated. Complex.
The way you're describing this actually makes me think it was the first game that I played at Bromley's.
Could well be. Yeah, like I can actually like pull up a screenshot here while I talk about other things.
Okay.
Yeah, one game that we had that we played, that my father and I would play a lot of, as it turns out, is called Utopia.
Yes.
And Utopia is very interesting. There are 2 islands, just kind of as a bit of a game board. And each controller will, control the cursor for, either island. First player on the left, second player on the right. And you have money, and the money allows you to construct things. And the principal ways of getting money is to build farms and have them be rained upon by rain clouds, or hurricanes, although generally you don't want that because they can destroy constructions. Or constructing a fishing boat and navigating the fishing boat by hand over schools of fish, and just hearing a satisfying little like bloom, 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 as they generate income for you. And using these funds, you can construct, houses, hospitals, and, basically just tend to the needs of a nation, as it turns out. And if you fail to do so sufficiently, then you have rebel activity that occurs on your island. and rebels just kind of occupy space, then you cannot construct there. I think they might even block movement of your cursor. I don't quite remember that. That one, it's been a while. Don't quote me on that one. But you just pretty much just play until a designated turn count expires, because all of this is happening in real time. This is not turn-based.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
every minute, I think, or maybe it's every half minute, something like that, is considered, a quote-unquote turn.
I think I did actually play that one once, but I was by myself, and I did not have instructions, and I had no clue what I was doing, and I was like 8. So
it's
Yeah.
kind of like a really early version of real time with pause.
No pause.
Okay.
It pauses automatically when a turn rolls over, because it'll update these are your current assets. These are your current relative scores, and at the end of the game, the relative scores are presented, and a winner is declared. And if you're just playing on your own, then that doesn't matter. But yeah, you need to use the phone pad to discern what kind of something you're constructing, and you can even be a complete jackwagon and press number 5, because number 5 is not constructing a structure. Instead, it's going and planting a rebel on a random space on on the opposing island. And it can just over-record anything, destroying it.
that makes you think of Populous.
I was doing a little poking around in a lot of publications like Ars Technica and other such things, or basically consider Utopia to be both the first real-time strategy game, but also the first city builder game, or empire builder game.
So
I think someone called it Civilization 0.5.
interesting. That's one
But,
game I never played, but I digress.
Utopia is a fascinating one. You were mentioning the IntelliVoice. I can definitely get into that, because boy howdy, the IntelliVoice games, those are memorable, and I'll definitely be having to talk about them, because my chosen icon this time around is from one of them.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And you are the Solar Sailor from Tron.
Yep. Anyone who's ever seen Tron probably remembers the segment with the Solar Sailor, and that it uses an E, not an O, because it sails on the solars as opposed to being a sailor.
Now, let me digress for 1 second. Has anyone here seen Tron? No.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
no.
I actually have seen Tron, so I know
I'm-
exactly what you're talking about.
I'm just going to say Tron is available on Disney Plus. Go watch it. It's fantastic.
I actually have the DVD, believe it or not.
Yo.
Plus Tron Legacy, too, which I liked a little better than Tron.
I have never heard that sequence of words arranged in that particular sequence in my life.
It's, I actually found the original Tron to be kind of boring. And Tron Legacy was also boring, but not as much.
Anyway.
Sorry.
So
That's
the
my
big
hot
thing
take
about
for this episode.
the IntelliVoice games is that the IntelliVoice was an add-on component that would produce synthesized dialogue to the player, and broadly was used to convey information in real time. No subtitles, so good luck if you are hard of hearing, or if you just don't understand what it's saying, which very realistic problem. But if you ever booted one up, you would definitely remember. Mattel Electronics presents B-17 Bomber. Space Spartans. Yeah, so B-17 Bomber is a game where you pilot a World War II B-17 out of England, and go to destroy priority targets. It's a simulator where you actually have to like mind your like your fuel, and you have like diagnostics to look over, and also handle incoming bogeys, handling the bomb drops, possibly while dealing with bogeys trying to shoot you down, and then fly all the way back to England. Very early simulation in that kind of manner. Space Spartans is, as the name kind of implies, is just kind of a survive as long as you can sort of deal, where it's a cockpit view space shooter where you are seeking to protect 3 space stations, and as soon as all 3 of them are destroyed, the game ends. And the vocal component for that one will like tell you when the space station is under attack, if you happen to be, dealing with another pack of whatever, something else, somewhere else. The back in B-17 bomber, the voice would tell you if there's, bogeys coming from, what heading, like bogeys, 9 o'clock. It always felt really funny to me because these are like supposed to be like British soldiers, but they all sound like they're from Alabama or something.
It's been so long since I played that game, I don't even remember what they sound like. All I could think is the people from Sylvie.
That was not a target.
I do remember the pilot voices from Sylphid on the Sega CD. I can't shake him, damn it!
Oh yeah, it's that same energy. It's totally that same energy.
Nice.
Solar Sailor is probably not the most complex of all of these, but also at the same time, I would also say probably the most unreasonable.
What's
you
the goal?
are so you are given a code early on in the game, and it flashes by very quickly, very quickly. You do not really have adequate time to really write it down. But the Solar Sailor moves along energy beams, and you have various voices. And when I looked this up a long time ago, evidently these are actually like the original voice actors having their voices converted through the speech synthesis to genuinely be them. I don't know how true that is, but they're credited, so I suppose they are.
Oh, it sounds like what they did with the Star Wars arcade game.
Could be. But yeah, so the various characters from that will like say, what the condition of the Solar Sailor is, such as energy low, which is the worst thing in the world to hear. If you hear energy low, you're about to die and can die at any moment. If you have energy high, then you don't care about anything other than recognizers, because recognizers will reduce your progress. And the way that you progress is you navigate a grid of solar beams, each with its own different energy output that are not represented visually. You only get that information through the audio output. And you have to navigate to a part of the grid, which usually is behind you, as it turns out.
Oh, boy.
And upon reaching that point, that code that you were provided at the before starting up the action, you need to enter in that code without error. Otherwise, you have to go back to where you spawned in to get that code again. And if you successfully input the code, then you advance 2 levels. If a recognizer snags you, you get moved back 1 level. And the goal is to get to the MCP at the very end of it, and then have a complete gameplay shift where you control Bette, of all things.
Really?
And intercept 1s and 0s that you are instructed to do so.
Okay.
While the MCP is shooting eye lasers at you. And you have like this shield that you can toggle on to prevent damage from being taken. It's a whole lot.
Sounds like it.
It's ambitious and not very good, but I'm fond of it. I'm very fond of it. I actually did write about it in one of the books I submitted work for HG 101 because I covered a lot of Tron stuff.
Nice.
Nice.
There are several Tron games. I'm not going to go into all of them.
Yeah,
I've already
okay.
spoken enough.
I've got a couple for the Atari 2600, so.
I'll just say that my runner-up for my personal icon was the Tron Deadly Discs interpretation of Intellivision Person, which has like a small little square to represent the disc.
Yeah. Oh, man. Tron. It's funny. Just an aside, having lived during that time when Tron came out and Tron was big and whatnot, I never actually saw the movie until years and years and years later. If I'd seen it as a kid, just like with E.T., might have had a little more resonance for me. But I didn't. So, what you gonna do? But getting back on the Intellivision here.
Yeah. One game that a lot of folks will probably have heard of, and this was eventually the pack-in title with the game. Wasn't with the console, wasn't initially, but if you were in the U.S., the pack-in title for the Intellivision was Burger Time.
Yeah, that I didn't know. If I remember correctly, with the original one, it was Las Vegas Poker and Blackjack.
Could not comment on that one. I'd have to look that one up. But yeah, if you ask my father what his favorite game on the Intellivision was, he would say Burger Time every time, which is really funny because he never ever threw the pepper.
So he just ran around avoiding everything or knocking it down on buns and stuff?
Yeah, that's all he ever did. He never threw the pepper.
How good was he?
It's all right.
Okay.
You can get to like levels 4 or 5 fairly reliably, occasionally 6.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Without throwing a single pepper.
He had his strategy.
Well, I guess so. Okay, clearly it worked. Yeah. Didn't they also do a game called Pepper 2 for Intellivision? Or am I thinking something else?
That's a Coleco game.
It is,
Yes,
okay.
it is.
Yeah, okay. Wrong console.
Which incidentally we did have. But I know that Kate is waiting very patiently over there for that one.
So, I honestly don't have much more to say about the Intellivision myself.
There's definitely a lot of neat stuff on the Intellivision, and it's kind of fascinating to go back to. I don't recommend Bomb Squad of the IntelliVoice games because, good grief, it's really hard to understand what that voice is telling you while you have a timer rapidly counting down. Actually, it has actual music, and it's rather intense going.
Hey,
While
LDB's here.
hi there. While all kinds of visual stimulus is going on with all kinds of shapes, bits, and bobs pulsing and swirling and everything, it is sensory overload and it is stressful, just like actual bomb handling, as it turns out.
Wow, so it's like an actual trainer.
There is one particular Intellivision game that I've put some time into that I really like, and that's Tower of Doom. I think it's a pretty neat dungeon crawler kind of thing.
So that's not one that we had. Evidently, that was one of the way later entries on the machine.
Yeah,
I'll do a D&D game, though, I think.
I think it was intended to be a D&D game initially, but then it ended up releasing without the license. And that's part of why it eventually showed up years later on Microsoft's Game Room for the Xbox 360, since they didn't have to deal with the D&D license for it.
Right.
I think it's fun.
I do actually remember playing, I've got the Intellivision Lives disc for the PS2. So that's where I've done the majority of my Intellivision playing. Shark and Frog Bog are pretty good.
Oh, I figured that we were going to move on, but yeah, Shark was another one. That was the one that I liked a lot as a youngin' because I could understand eat fish, get big. Avoid shark, or Wreck shark tail. Be superior. Assert dominance. Incidentally, if anyone's ever wondering, what... You, mermaid VTuber, do you like ocean things? Yes.
Well, that answers that question. Then Frog Bog, that was one that I played and had a lot of fun with. Of course, I'd played the Atari version of that game, Frogs and Flies, first. So, there was a little experience with that one. Oh, and Prime just mentioned Night Stalker.
Oh, yep, we have that one too.
That was a good one. The 2600 port was not as good. Dark Caverns, I think it was called. But there's a variation on that for the 7800 called, I think, Dungeon something or other. I've got it. I just can't think what the actual title is. It's really good.
Yeah, Night Stalker was one that I liked a lot. My father did not like a lot. I actually went on just kind of like a high score tear at one point, and I got to a point where I made the robot end up being like irresponsibly strong. It was actually really funny. It takes like 3 hits to kill, and like almost insta paralyzes you if he gets on the same plane.
I'm going to try that next time I play that game. Just to see if I can actually get that high.
I forget what it is. I want to say the score threshold is like 50,000 or something like that for that.
50,000.
It's something. Yep.
Keep that in mind.
Super hazy memory. Don't quote that one.
Okay. I'll still keep in mind unless I see something that contradicts it otherwise. Now, Logan also mentioned Astro Smash.
Yep, we had that one too.
That was a fun one. I did want to go ahead and talk about the Magic games, like I said before. So I guess I did have a little more to say about the Intellivision than I thought. The ones I mainly played were Microsurgeon and Dracula. Microsurgeon, still, no idea what the hell I was doing in that game, but damn if it wasn't really cool looking. I mean, you're actually inside a human body, like just navigating your way around, doing whatever you're supposed to do. I didn't have instructions, so I couldn't tell you. And Dracula may have been the first game where you actually play as a villain. Maybe. I don't know. But you could turn into a bat, you could fly around, hypnotize town people, suck their blood, and you had to get back to your coffin before the sun rose.
A good evening.
Yeah, exactly. It's too bad none of those made it onto that Intellivision Lives disc. But, Activision owns the Magic, so there you go. Sewer Sam, that is one I've read about, but I have never actually seen or played it.
Yeah, not familiar with that one. Honestly, the Magic ones are kind of beyond the point where my father was buying these cartridges, evidently.
Now, there was another game. It was by Mattel, I'm pretty sure, or at least whoever was doing the Intellivision time, because it was a late release. It was called Thin Ice. It was basically a cutesy Kicks clone, where you played this penguin and you're skating around the ice trying to carve holes in it and just dump your friends in before one of them caught you and punted you out of there. And Logan,
so this is the first game where you're the villain.
Yeah, that was Dracula. Dracula came out first. Logan, Magic games were not the ones with the orange carts. They were black, and they had kind of an extended handle with the company logo engraved in them, but they weren't really ever used as a handle. They had actually finger holds on the side where you could just pull them in and out. But they definitely weren't orange, I know that. Okay, now I think I don't have anything else to say about the Intellivision. Anybody else?
I could probably go and say some more things, but it's just going to be me gushing about stuff. It has Reversi. I seem to be the only person who knows what Reversi is these days.
Oh, I know what Reversi is.
Is that connected to Othello?
Yes.
Okay.
Othello's a later made version.
I see.
Yeah, that's I have a tendency to stay away from Reversi and Othello and any games like that, including Spot.
Mhm.
It just no. Oh, and Gamoku Renju for the TRS-80.
Oh wait, I just remembered. I remembered another one. I saw another one on the list that we have. The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh yes, there was a port of that for it.
Yeah, it's sure something.
Well, I never got a chance to play it, so I'm not sure exactly what they improved or degraded from the 2600 version, but
I couldn't tell you. All I can say is it is the Battle of Hoth. You control a speeder. Good luck.
that's basically the 2600 version.
Also, you don't do the cable thing. You just try and shoot them in the eye.
Yep, it just wasn't advanced enough to be able to do the cables. And I know that there would be little bomb bays that would open up if you got a shot and there was like instant death. Otherwise, you had to actually whittle the walker's energy down, and they change colors as they go along. So
I don't remember the Bombay element. I don't know if that was excluded or just something I don't remember. I did not like playing that one.
see, the 2600 Empire was the first game I ever owned in my life.
Mm.
So I spent a lot of time playing that one. Didn't hurt that I was a huge Star Wars fan at the time, too. So, I mean, let's see. It's winter 1982. I had just turned 8, and The Empire Strikes Back was my favorite movie. Of course I'm going to love this game. I had a giant collection of action figures and vehicles and everything, so. And I was so hyped up for Return of the Jedi, which I grew less enamored with as the years went on. Empire's still the best. Anyway, Star Wars stuff aside, anybody else have anything they want to say about the Intellivision at all?
I'm just sitting over here in my Tron corner crying.
Kate?
I've already said everything I can about the Intellivision.
Mike?
Nah.
Okay. Logan, actually, Utopia was the subject of an intense few minutes of discussion there. So, sorry you missed that. You can catch on the replay, though.
Yep. I will throw out, because it is a Mattel produced machine. Do you mind if I bring up the Aquarius real quick?
No, go ahead.
So the Aquarius was an attempt by Mattel to kind of do a little bit of bridge gapping for various functions and whatnot. And it succeeded at none of them and was immensely terrible to actually develop for. It did not get a lot going, but it did actually have a few versions of some of Mattel's games, like Utopia. And funny enough, the Aquarius version of Utopia was actually the first version of it I played. I played that before the Intellivision version.
Interesting.
As far as I'm aware, because I only ever saw the Aquarius version the one time, so I couldn't tell you specific differences, but I can say that in the Aquarius version, the cursor you control is a flat square as opposed to a hollow square.
Now,
I don't know anything else.
now there was some kind. It might have been an Aquarius. It might not have been that I played way back when. And the only thing I really remember for it was a Biorhythms game, which wasn't even really a game. It was just put in some numbers and stuff and watch the pretty patterns.
Right. I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Logan,
as far as I'm aware, the only things we have on the Aquarius were Utopia and Snake.
Snake. Good old Snake. And Logan, the INTV was actually just the abbreviation for the Intellivision. And the Aquarius was released too.
We have an Aquarius. It was released.
Yes.
And confirmed.
They all came out and just came and went with the crash, pretty much.
And for clarification, I'm not talking about like single player Snake. I'm talking about basically what would be like the light cycles kind of Snake.
Oh, like surround.
Where you have like multiple colors going around and trying to make them crash into each other.
Yep. So
yeah, that Snake.
Yeah, that's basically the 2600 game surround. So now, I'm gonna kind of go off plan here for a little bit. Kate has been very quiet for the past hour and 40 minutes, so I'd like to go ahead and open this up for her to talk about the ColecoVision.
Oh
Yes,
my
please.
gosh. Ah.
I'm just sitting over there bored.
Well, you're up, Kate.
Okay. So I don't have an extensive history to give about the system. I can give a little bit of background. The ColecoVision was released by Coleco in 1982. Coleco's name is an abbreviation of their original name, the Connecticut Leather Company.
Yep.
So they started out initially in a very different business from where they would wind up later on.
Yeah.
They eventually became known as a toy company, and from there would branch out into the video game market. They had some previous efforts, such as the Coleco Telstar, which was their attempt at producing a Pong clone. And from there, they would eventually go on to release a video game system featuring interchangeable cartridges, as was the style at the time. And that was the ColecoVision.
Yep. And
So,
not to
go
interrupt,
ahead.
but if I remember correctly, that came out 82, and they did the Cabbage Patch Kids in 83. So it's like they had two of the hottest selling things for a little while there.
Oh yeah, totally. So the ColecoVision was promoted as being a more powerful, capable system with arcade ports that more closely resembled what you could access in an actual arcade. The main system seller, which I believe was bundled with the system, was Coleco's port of Donkey Kong.
Yep.
And this is a very capable port, not arcade perfect, but close enough, and it was a big hit. And this was mentioned a little bit earlier, but funnily enough, Coleco themselves also created ports of Donkey Kong for the 2600 and Intellivision.
Yep.
Those versions did not resemble the arcade original nearly as closely, to the point where it's been rumored, I believe, that Coleco purposefully made those ports worse in order to make their version for the ColecoVision look better by comparison. I don't know if there's any proof to that, but when people are saying that kind of thing, it's probably not a great sign for how those ports have been received.
Well, I'm going to say this much about the 2600 port of Donkey Kong. Sure, Donkey Kong may have looked like a very angry gingerbread man made of bricks, but it was still Donkey Kong at home, and we were happy to have it. It actually didn't play too bad.
That's cool.
So
ColecoVision games were technically very impressive for the time, as was mentioned during the Odyssey section.
yes.
I think its hardware is comparable to the MSX1 computer line, as well as Sega's SG-1000.
Yeah,
If
they're
you want to have
very,
a frame of reference for what level of tech we're dealing with here.
yeah, they're very, very similar.
hmm
Close
So,
enough, like
games-
Earl mentioned, they could port games to the ColecoVision from the MSX.
Yeah, and there are also SG-1000 ports to the ColecoVision as well. Like several games such as Ninja Princess or Girls Garden were ported from the SG-1000 to the ColecoVision. So games on the ColecoVision would often be very colorful and feature pretty detailed art and music. However, the system did not have the smoothest scrolling capabilities, so that was a limitation that developers had to work around when creating games for the system. Like there
A
were
very
some,
MSX issue.
yeah, exactly. So like there were some games that had scrolling in them, like Cosmic Adventure or Cosmic Avenger is one that I rather enjoy, and very early horizontal shmup. But there was a lot of single screen games on the system. So I should also mention the ColecoVision controller.
Oh boy.
That was an interesting looking one.
Yeah, it's somewhat comparable in design to the Intellivision controller in that it had a number pad on it.
It's the Intellivision controller, but upside down with a joystick instead of a disc.
Yeah, basically. I've never actually used an Intellivision controller myself, but from what I've seen pictures of, it's definitely comparable in that regard. So
So I just
the
would like to mention real quick, we have a ColecoVision as well, so I can actually contribute to this part. But when it comes to the controller in particular, my father, handyman that he is, the Player One ColecoVision controller joystick broke. So what does he do? He inserts a screwdriver into it, and that's now the joystick for that
Wow.
controller to this day.
oh my gosh.
If it works, right?
Pretty much.
That's crazy. Awesome, but crazy.
So the
There's so much back to it.
ColecoVision controller basically looked like a television remote. It's a black rectangular remote shape with a silver number pad on top toward the bottom. It's 3 squares wide by 4 squares tall. The top 3 rows have numbers 1 through 9, and the bottommost row has a 0 in the center with an asterisk in the bottom left and a pound sign in the bottom right. Most
Mhm.
games use this number pad for selecting a difficulty or game mode, but there are some rare exceptions, such as Gustbuster, which actually relies on the number pad to adjust your height and movement while you're in mid-flight. And the main point of interaction on the controller consists of the 2 gray buttons on either side of the remote, as well as the digital stick on the front toward the top of the controller. The 2 gray buttons generally function fine. They're alright. The stick, though. Now, I grew up with the ColecoVision as a kid. I wasn't alive when the ColecoVision came out, but my family had one, so it's something that I've had access to from a very early age, and I'm very
Mm-hmm.
familiar with the system on original hardware. I've got to say, from experience, I have to say this stick is a piece of shit. It is so bad. It is simultaneously stiff and requires a ton of pressure to move, which can wear on you during an extended play session.
And that's why the screwdriver was so great. It alleviated all those problems.
That sounds pretty convenient.
There's your solution. Just pull out the standard joystick and shove a screwdriver in there.
It was
I
great
think
because like the screwdriver made the whole joystick assembly taller because it was like twice as long as the joystick. So if you just like apply pressure at the top, then the whole thing like does what it needs to do with much less effort.
right. I think judging by the indents in the side of the controller, Coleco intended people to hold the controller with their left hand around the bottom while using their right hand to move the stick, as their left hand's thumb and
Hmm.
forefinger hit the side buttons.
Yeah.
But that does not feel natural to me, so I just hold the controller with my right hand and press my left thumb on the top of the stick like I'm using a really awkward, oversized D-pad. It's maybe not optimal, but I'm just used to that at this point.
Yeah, the left hand grip, right hand stick. Yeah, that's the way we always used it. Yeah.
hmm And worth noting, there are some other controllers that exist for the system as well. The main one off the top of my head is a Super Action controller, which is way larger, and that was designed to, again, be held with your left hand. And there would be this gigantic stick on the top with a red knob, and there would also be a number pad on the top and a spinner, and there on the handle of the Super Action controller there would be 4 different colored buttons that you could press with your left hand's fingers. And I think the main game that was intended for was Taito's Frontline, which is a run and gun shooter that got ported to it.
Oh, I
I
think it
think
was actually the original one. Like, it started the whole thing. It even predated Commando.
hmm so I have very vague memories of using it when I was really little, like pre-kindergarten, but I haven't used it since, so I can't say from like recent experience how it is, but I think from what I recall, you have to press one button in order to rotate clockwise and another button to rotate counterclockwise. And since they're just organized from top to bottom on the handle of the stick, it's a little unintuitive. But they were trying to experiment with what they had. So from that perspective, I think it's kind of fascinating. And since, like a lot of platforms at the time, the ColecoVision had a DB9 connector for the controller port, you can actually plug a Genesis controller into a ColecoVision and play some games with that. However, a ColecoVision controller has more buttons than a Genesis controller, so you can't play every game on the system with the Genesis controller, but it's still a pretty neat novelty and a good way to play some games if you want to have a good D-pad.
Yeah, there's a lot of Golden Age consoles that you can actually plug in a Master System controller and it'll work just fine. That's ask me how I know.
Nice.
I skipped the Master System controller and went right to the Genesis. First time I played Empire on the 2600 with the Genesis controller, it was like, where have you been all my life? I have so much control now. I still have one hooked up to my 7800.
Regarding the original ColecoVision controller, I think my family has at least 5 different ColecoVision controllers, and out of them, 1 works fine. The other 4 all have different issues, like maybe one of the side buttons doesn't function, or the number pad doesn't function, etc. And reportedly, the ColecoVision hardware was very prone to failure, both the controllers and the system itself. So
The controller, you say?
So I'm, at least as of the last time I tried to play the ColecoVision on original hardware, my ColecoVision still works. I'm thankful it does. I have no idea how long it'll continue to work for, but if it ever dies out, at least emulation exists.
This is
So
true.
there's that.
That's how I played all the
Unfortunate-
ColecoVision stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's hard to input all of the ColecoVision's buttons onto a modern controller due to the number pad layout and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, you'd have to come up with some kind of workaround for that, but at least there is a way.
Well, I know when I'm running ColecoVision stuff on my PC, I just assigned all the numbers to the numpad on the keyboard.
That would
The
likely
wacky
work.
thing about that is that because it emulates a phone dial pad as opposed to like a keyboard number pad, they're going to be upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
this is true.
So, for some games like Gustbuster, you do not want to map them to the exact numbers because Gustbuster would play reversed if you did that. So you do not want to map them to their exact numbers. So that's something to keep in mind.
I definitely will if I ever find myself playing that game. Usually I just use it to select like difficulty level or number of players or whatnot.
All right.
It
So
would, like that theory would work fine as long as you're not like accounting for like what number is this and more just like, okay, this is in this position.
perhaps. I guess as far as ColecoVision games go, I can start with the one that my icon is taken from for this stream. My icon is of Panama Joe, who is the protagonist of my favorite ColecoVision game and one of my favorite games of all time, Montezuma's Revenge.
Hell yes.
I really, really love Montezuma's Revenge. Be
That is
clear,
a wild beast.
Yeah.
It's not a ColecoVision exclusive by any means. It was one of those games that got ported to a billion systems at the time, but I grew up with the ColecoVision version, and I still enjoy going back to it to this day. So,
I will
Go
just
ahead.
say, speaking of Montezuma's Revenge, the first one I ever played was on the 2600. After that, I played the Master System version. And then when I found out it was coming out for the NES, I had to, back that. So,
wait, Montezuma's Revenge on the NES?
you didn't know this?
Is this like
I
a
didn't know
homebrew
either.
port?
Oh, it was actually done by the original creator.
Right, but is it like homebrew, like after the system's lifetime?
Oh yeah, it only came out like last year.
Oh,
Oh, well,
okay.
that would explain it.
Yeah, that explains it.
And yes, Prime is right. We had a conversation about adjusting between the from Atari to NES when it came to the controllers. In fact, I wrote about it in memoirs. That aside, Montezuma's Revenge is great.
Yeah, I absolutely adore it. For
It,
anyone who's not familiar with Montezuma's Revenge, it's a non-linear 2D platformer. It's not a scrolling platformer since, like a lot of games on the system, the action takes place across single screens, although you can flip basically from screen to screen in order to simulate the feeling of being in a gigantic maze. And you're basically every single stage consists of you starting at the top of a roughly pyramid shaped maze with different screens that are predetermined. It's not randomly generated. And you move through the different screens as you try to eventually get your way to the bottom of the map layout. And this involves dealing with different hazards, like whether it's like snakes or tarantulas or like bouncing
Fire.
skulls. Yeah, fire as well.
yeah, fire is the reason why I never got very far in that game.
It's a very punishing game. Like I've been
It's
playing
brutal.
it since I grew up, and I've only ever made it as far as partway through stage 2. Like just to give you an idea of how difficult it is.
We may
So,
Yeah.
we may have
go
to have
ahead.
a round table one of these days about games inspired by Indiana Jones.
Perhaps.
Montezuma's Revenge will be a major topic to discuss.
I mean, we already did Ernest Evans, so
We can still bring it up.
yeah, we could.
But of course, we'd have to talk about
So,
Pitfall, because, yeah, it's kind of obvious. But anyway, I digress. Go on.
another thing about Montezuma's Revenge is that at the bottom floor of every single stage, that floor is not lit up. So the bottom floor appears to be completely dark, so you can only see your sprite and maybe a couple other things. Like if there's lava on the screen, you can see the lava or whatnot. And the expectation is that in order to beat the stage, you need to explore the rest of the level in order to find a torch. And then when you get that torch into your inventory, then you can explore the bottom floor of that current stage while being able to actually see where you're going. But I never found the torch as a kid. I remember I played this game so much as a kid that I managed to feel my way through the dark bottom floor of the first stage, and I actually memorized where everything was through trial and error and was able to
Ah.
finish that stage without a torch.
Speedrunner strats.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was my experience with it. I've eventually discovered that the torch is even a thing in it, I think like a few years ago or so when I was playing it, but it was kind of funny to think that I'd gone the hard way through that stage all this time. So yeah, I think it's an excellent
I think
game.
it'd be
I really
forgiven.
adore it.
I think it'd be forgiven for never locating it, considering that, just leaving the starting screen is already irresponsibly difficult.
It can be challenging. There's the game's platforming can be very strict and unforgiving. Like it's fast and
It's very
responsive.
fast. It's
but-
very fast.
Yeah, that's like there are other versions of the game that don't move nearly as fast, but the ColecoVision version in particular is like light speed. Like it can really catch you off guard if you don't know what to expect.
Oh yeah.
Oh
I
yeah,
can
no,
see that happening.
there's no moment to rest. You need to be like on point doing pixel precision at a snapshot
Yeah.
with that game. It is brutal. Like
But it
nowadays
is
I could
fine.
probably manage it. But definitely when I was younger, no.
Hmm.
So, if I may ask, Kate, what were some of your other favorite ColecoVision games?
Um, I had a bunch. Um, I liked the Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. ports, of course. Those are kind of system staples. The thing about the Donkey Kong port is I think it was based primarily on the US arcade release, which made the levels in a kind of weird order. So Donkey Kong in the original Japanese arcade version had you going through 25cc, the stage 25cc, then stage 50cc, then 75cc, and then 100cc, and you would loop them over in that order. But for some reason, the US version of the arcade machine instead had you start with 25cc, then you would go straight to 100cc. And then when you finished that, you would loop back. And then your second loop, you would have, I think, 25cc and then go to 75cc and then 100cc. And then when you finish that loop, then on the third loop, I think, you would finally encounter the 50cc stage. So because of that, I think that's why the ColecoVision version and several other ports leave out the Pi Factory stage. Or not the Pi Factory. It looks like a Pi Factory, but I think it's technically supposed to be a cement factory. And so the ColecoVision port, because of that, is missing a stage. And the stages themselves are a little bit simplified in design, but overall it's a very close approximation. And especially for 1982, being able to play an arcade game in that level of quality at home was a very big deal. So it was really successful.
If I had known more about the ColecoVision at the time, I probably would have been very jealous, especially after seeing Angry Gingerbread Man Donkey Kong.
Yeah. There are later versions, including the NES ports of those games, that would probably be regarded as better technically, but the ColecoVision versions were the ones I grew up with, and I still have a soft spot for them. I think they're pretty neat.
Now, let me ask you another question. Did you...
Sure.
I think there was a game based on the movie 2010, the year we made contact. And unless I'm missing my guess, if so, did you get to play that at all?
I never actually owned that game. I think I've seen the name 2010 in lists of ColecoVision game names, but I don't know anything about that game.
Well,
apparently Wikipedia lists it as a puzzle game.
That wouldn't surprise me. You're probably trying to reactivate HAL and whatnot, just like the movie.
Perhaps.
So,
yeah,
and as Prime said, there were you loved a lot of ColecoVision ports like Donkey Kong Jr., Donkey Kong Original, Mr. Do, or Mr. How do you say it? It was Mr. Do, Mr. Do,
yeah,
Mr.
Totally.
What?
I would assume Mr. Do.
Yeah, I've heard it both ways.
And there are lots of other ports that I like as well. Frogger on the ColecoVision is a favorite for my entire family. We all adore that version of the game. I actually, in some ways, think ColecoVision Frogger is better than Arcade Frogger, and that's largely because the arcade game has a bunch of different music tracks that constantly interrupt what you're doing, so you rarely ever get to actually hear the Frogger theme. But in the ColecoVision version, you get to hear the Frogger theme uninterrupted, and I think it's a cute theme and pretty upbeat, so I like being able to hear the full theme.
Nice.
Yeah.
I know in the 2600 port from Parker Brothers, it would play like the little opening jingle, but then it would just be the sounds of hopping.
Interestingly, the was it the Starpath or the Supercharger or something for the 2600?
Yeah, the Starpath Supercharger.
Which I have, and I will be talking about.
Nice.
Yeah, that version I think plays the full Frogger theme, so that's worth noting.
Wouldn't
but
surprise
anyways,
me at all.
For ColecoVision, there's a bunch of other stuff that I adore. some of these games I grew up with as a kid, but then others I went on to get later in life as an adult just by like looking online and winning auctions for them because I really like the ColecoVision. And one that I did not grow up with, but that I got later on is Frenzy, which is the lesser known sequel to the famous arcade shooter run and gun sort of thing called Berserk.
Frenzy, yes, love Frenzy.
Yeah. So the main thing that makes Frenzy stand out as a game compared to Berserk, it's very similar, but whereas Berserk had walls that would kill you if you touched them because I think they were electrified, in Frenzy, the walls don't kill you. However, there are different wall types that you can engage with. Some walls are destructible, and that can be pretty handy depending on what level environment you've been tossed into. So you can just shoot through a wall if you need to get to the exit. And other walls can reflect your shots, so that can be another thing that can either help or hinder your progress. So it's a fun alternate take on the Berserk formula.
Yeah, that ended up getting a homebrew port to the Atari 7800 many years later, which is
Nice.
pretty much how I first played it. It also has Berserk included as a nice bonus. But I remember playing that, and it's like, I like this. This is good stuff. This is actually a little better than Berserk. A little more variety, at least.
It's hard for me to say which I prefer. I think they're both great in their own way. And going back to Cabbage Patch Kids, since he brought that up at the start, I have no attachment to the Cabbage Patch Kids intellectual property, but I do have to say that Cabbage Patch Kids Adventures in the Park is a really solid ColecoVision platformer. It's developed by Konami, and it's pretty fascinating. I don't think Konami's name is on the game itself at all, but when you play it, it has a very similar vibe to other early Konami games like Frogger or Circus Charlie. So I appreciate that about it. Adventures in the Park is basically Konami's take on Pitfall. It doesn't feature the non-linear like treasure collecting aspect of Pitfall, so it's a little more simplistic in design, but it does feature stages where you flip between different screens that have different sets of obstacles, like a lake to jump across or like pillars to jump between. And I think it's a good time. It's fun and bright and cheery. I like it.
Nothing wrong with that.
And I could probably name a million games. I'll keep it to like a few others at least.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Another game that I mentioned this a little bit, but there's a horizontal shmup for the system called Cosmic Avenger. I don't know the exact release timeline, but I think it was maybe not as early as Scramble, but maybe a little bit after Scramble. So it's a very early take on the genre, and it's an example of a scrolling game on the ColecoVision. And the scrolling is not the smoothest around, but it works okay. It's kind of interesting since when you move closer to the left of the screen, the scrolling slows down, but when you move closer to the right of the screen, the scrolling speeds up. So you can adjust your speed and also adjust your height and fire either like projectiles straight to the right or drop bombs. And I think it's a good time. It's a very precision-focused shooter rather than one that expects you to just mash the shoot button over and over. I have a good time with that.
This sounds like this may have inspired Gallop, since we were speaking about that on a prior roundtable. Because Gallop goes faster when you are closer to the right of the screen.
That would be interesting to look into. I'll have to look into that. And another game on the ColecoVision that is a fairly early example of an is it called an auto scroller or like an auto runner or something like that? Um, Stuff like Cannibalt. So an early example of that happens to be on the ColecoVision, and that's BC's Quest for Tires.
Love that game.
It's based, yeah, it's based on the BC comic strip that would be in newspapers, maybe still in
geez.
newspapers. I have no idea.
Yeah, that was definitely a newspaper comic, and boy howdy, does that creator not have a good reputation these days?
Oh, really? I wasn't aware.
We'll just say that they are very Christian.
I say.
Hmm.
I think the only thing I'm aware of is that they actually had a comic. There was like a 9/11 memorial comic, even though the comic takes place in like the Stone Age.
Oh, they've done all kinds of things that are in poor taste.
What had happened to
see.
Grog knock down a couple of giant rocks?
Um, it was like them setting up like shadow puppets that were designed to look like the Twin Towers.
Oh boy.
Um, Anyways, the game BC's Quest for Tires involves you um controlling some character who I don't know.
I think
but
it's actually BC
it's-
that you play.
maybe.
Yeah.
You're playing as a character who's on like a single rolling tire. It looks kind of like an early Segway, and you adjust the speed. It's another speed adjusting thing where you can either move really slowly and that causes the screen to scroll slowly, or you can adjust the speed to being pretty fast and that causes the screen to scroll really fast. And you can generally use that to adjust the speed to your liking, but there are a couple points where you actually need to have a certain speed. And you can also press up to jump or press down in order to duck momentarily. So it's basically dodging obstacles in order to reach some character at the end before you loop again. And I think it's a good time.
I think the genre you were looking for was Infinite Runner.
Maybe. It's not really something I'm super experienced with, but I know this is an early example of the genre.
Right, right.
You know, BC's Quest for Tires, just to put my 2 cents in here. I played the Coleco version a couple of times via emulation, but I had access to an Atari 800 at one point when I was young, and that was one of the games that was there for it. And I played the hell out of it.
Cool stuff.
Very.
And since this was brought up, I should mention Pepper 2. I don't actually own Pepper 2, but I tried it out a little bit just earlier today, coincidentally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty interesting game. It's basically Pac-Man crossed with, I guess, like Kix or Amidar. So you're limited to specific like lines of movement on the screen, and you have to encase different parts of the screen in like squares that get filled in as you move around. And you can actually flip between 4 separate screens simultaneously. So you might have like some squares to fill in on screen 1, but you can also flip to like screen 2 or screen 3 before you finish screen 1 and then move back to screen 1 later when you feel like it. Kind of an interesting like multi-large scope scale kind of game, and I will probably revisit it at some point.
Yeah, I've seen screenshots. I think I might have even played it once in emulation, but I don't remember that much about it.
Yeah.
But LDP wanted to know if Pepper 2 has ever ported to anything. I don't recall it being an arcade game. I think that was actually Peter Pepper's Ice Cream Factory. But I don't know if Pepper 2 was what the deal was with that.
Apparently, Pepper 2 was an arcade game by Exidy.
Oh, okay.
seems the ColecoVision port is the only port that exists.
Interesting. Again, that I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me wonder if I'm thinking of a different game.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's
Potentially.
entirely possible. Maybe I'm thinking of Diner.
And what else? I have like a long list of games that I like. Um, I guess one more that I want to mention that I actually have not put a ton of time into, but that I'd like to play more of at some point is Jumpman Jr. So there's a game called Jumpman, which is for other platforms at the time. And my understanding is that Jumpman Jr. is basically a ColecoVision specific like sequel or follow-up to it. And I think it's supposed to have 12 different stages that are basically sort of Donkey Kong or Miner 2049er-esque screens with platforming. And I have only played like 2 or 3 screens into it, but it seems like a good time, and I'd like to go back to it at some point.
Yeah, that would be something worth revisiting, I think.
Hmm. Oh, and another game that I barely ever hear anyone talk about, but that I also found just by getting it on eBay one day, is Flipper Slipper, which is uh, the ColecoVision's equivalent to a sort of breakout style game. The really unique thing about Flipper Slipper is that the paddles at the bottom, they're curved, so they're kind of like half, like imagine if you took like an empty ball and you split it in half, and then you put the 2 empty halves at the bottom of the screen, and you had them, like the insides of them facing upward. So the paddles are curved, and when the ball is coming down to the bottom of the screen, you can tilt the paddles and kind of like roll the ball along in order to adjust its trajectory as it bounces up. And it's a pretty interesting take on the concept. I think it's fun, and I've never heard anyone talk about Flipper Slipper ever anywhere.
I think you're the first person I've ever met that's ever even brought it up.
I can't say I'm familiar now.
Yeah. It's a fun game. I like it.
Well, I know based on what I played via emulation, there was a lot of good stuff on the ColecoVision. I wish I'd known about it at the time.
Hmm.
I think I might have seen a passing reference to it, but I was very much immersed in our next subject we're going to be discussing that I didn't really give it that much of a passing glance because no one I knew had it.
Yeah. My experience is that even though my family happened to have a ColecoVision, I think I've met like 1 or 2 people in real life who actually even knew what the ColecoVision was, much less happened to own it and liked playing games on it. It it
But
was.
clearly that means that we need to meet so we can improve that counter by 1.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm down for that.
For that reason
So-
and that reason alone.
Yeah.
So the ColecoVision is a pretty solid system with a lot of interesting games, mostly ports, but also a couple of unique exclusives. And it's not a huge library. I think it's a little over 100 games, so it's not nearly as large as something like the 2600 library, but it has its place. And if you happen to be interested in it, I think it's worth giving a try. You might be pleasantly surprised.
Now, here's something that I wanted to bring up before we got into the Atari stuff. Is that I said earlier that the whole thing at the time was just wild. And the reason being is because you'd see stuff like this. Atari would bring out games for other consoles under their Atari Soft label. Mattel brought out games for the 2600 under the name M Network. And they were just ports of Intellivision games. And there were also actual, like for the ColecoVision, they had some kind of a module you could plug into where you could actually play 2600 games on it.
Oh yeah.
And
We don't own that one at my house, but I remember hearing about it, and it's pretty fascinating to know its history.
yeah, it's I know that there's an author I'm very familiar with. He's contributed to memoirs in the past. Brett Weiss, huge ColecoVision fan. So usually that's the guy I talk to whenever anything ColecoVision related comes up. But no, but it's crazy how all this stuff was happening at the time. You'd never see that kind of thing today, or even 20, 30 years ago. It's like, yeah, we're going to bring out a converter so you can play Sega Genesis games on your Super Nintendo. It's like...
Actually, I can kind of think of a similar example that would happen in the 90s, and that's Bleem, which would let you play PlayStation games on a Dreamcast, I believe.
Yeah, that was about the closest we got at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, sure, they did eventually make a thing that would let you play Genesis games on the Super Nintendo years later, but that was an aftermarket thing.
Right.
So, but it's just insane how all that worked. This is the kind of stuff you would just never see these days, or any days past the crash, I think, which may have actually contributed to it in 83. And of course, as we all know, the Great Crash of 83 was a strictly American phenomenon. It did not happen around the world like a lot of people seem to think it did.
Right.
But a lot of reason for that was because of all these fly-by-night companies putting out like subpar Pac-Man and Space Invader clones, and the public kind of got sick of it, and they all decreed video games were a fad, and toy retailers wouldn't carry it and stuff like that. But we'll get into what happened after that later. Now, as a kid, my parents, they did not buy what was the most popular just because this is what everybody had. They bought what they liked, and my mother had a chance to play the Atari 2600 at my older brother's house, and she loved it. And she ended up getting the console as a birthday gift from my grandmother. Well, that lasted for a little while, and then the kids took over. But for a time, the whole family played that thing. My parents would go head-to-head in games like Canyon Bomber, Air Sea Battle. My mother's favorite game that I recall, and Sharon out there in the chat can either back me up or try and disprove it, although I'm pretty sure I'm correct, was Carnival, the Sega game, which was, before Coleco did the ColecoVision, they actually made games for Atari. And that was one of the ones they ported. So, no, she loved that game. She'd play that for hours. But we started buying software for it. We had a lot of the early Activision games, a lot of the Atari games, especially when the prices started going down. When they hit rock bottom during the crash, then it was easy to go out and scoop up 6 games for $3.
Mm-hmm.
Toy stores would practically pay you to take them away.
Pretty much, yeah.
We got a lot of software, plus birthdays, Christmases, and so on. Like I mentioned, I got Empire Strikes Back for my, Christmas in '82. That was just, it's like, I actually own my very own video game. This is not the family's, this is mine.
I kind of like how your story right there mirrors basically the story that I had of how we got the Jaguar over at my place. I was like, yeah, this thing is terrible. Please take it for nothing. Here's 6 games.
Exactly. Rex, where are you located? So, while I'm waiting for Rex to answer, yeah, it was just crazy. Just when the crash happened, the prices dropped, and we built up a huge library, and it got even better in the late 80s. I was a very, very much an Atari fanboy at the time. Don't judge me. I'm young. In the state that's high in the middle and dumb on both ends. It's not coming to me.
I have 2
I think he means Ohio.
That could be.
I have 2 friends who are from there, and they kind of bonded over that because one's in Florida, the other's still in Ohio, and they basically just have a rapport between the two of them for just being knowing how that is, and being able to just be like, oh yeah, that thing, just like trading it like war stories. It's funny.
But really, Rex, you never saw games cheaper than like $13 in the 80s? Huh. Interesting. By the way, Sharon, I was not a teenager when you bought that game for me. That came out in 82, 83, I think, at the latest. So I would have been maybe 8 or 9. And I also skipped school so I could stay home and play it. Not going to lie. I faked being sick. But yeah, as an Atari fanboy in the late 80s, yeah, all the kids in school are talking about the Nintendo, how great it was, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, keep it. I don't care. But, as short-sighted as that may have been on my part, that did net me a shitload of good games. There was one guy in particular who, I kind of became known as the Atari guy, and he asked me one day, he's like, yeah, you collect Atari games, right? Yeah. And he's like, well, some relatives came over, they left a whole bunch of Atari games with us. They don't want them, we don't want them. You want them? Sure. How much? Here, have them. Okay, all right, I'll bring them in tomorrow. Next day, I'm sitting at my desk. He comes in carrying 2 duffel bags. Puts one of them on my desk and says, here you go. I'm like, what? I open the zipper, and there's like 50 games in there. Some of which we already had, but there's a lot of games I never even heard of before. Stuff like Mountain King and Solar Fox. And
Nice.
it was just... We had the 7800 by that point, which was backward compatible with the 2600. So when I brought that home, tried out every game. Some of them were fan-fucking-tastic. I mean, Mountain King. That's one of my favorites to this day. And then there was crap like Racquetball. Mike knows what I'm talking about, right, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, Racquetball. But yeah, there was so much good stuff in there. And a lot of them had the manuals and even some catalogs as well. So, Sharon's asked me to tell the story of how she bought me Vanguard for my birthday. Well, I wasn't there when she bought it, so I couldn't tell you. But I remember getting to open presents that morning. I got some Lego sets, maybe a couple of Star Wars figures, and Vanguard. And suddenly I got very sick. It's like, I don't feel so good. I don't know. I'm pretty sure my parents knew I was full of shit, but they let me stay home anyway. And believe me, I played Vanguard all day. It is still one of my favorites.
Nice.
Yes, Sharon. I see you've mentioned my name. But there was a lot of stuff.
I am being called out right now. State your purpose.
Well, and there were other kids at school who had Atari games. They didn't want them. They didn't want to let them go for free, but a couple bucks, and I had copies of Burger Time, Riddle the Sphinx, Raiders of the Lost Ark, you name it. Was I very surprised? Yes, I was when I saw Vanguard, because I'd wanted that for a while. I was also young enough to occasionally get upset when I didn't get my way. And I remember my parents ordered Dig Dug after I played it over at a friend's house. And when it came into the Montgomery Wards, they'd ordered the wrong one. Not my parents. Montgomery Ward screwed this one up. They'd ordered the 5200 version instead of the 2600 version. I was upset. I wanted my Dig Dug. So they had to say this isn't the right one, and we went back like a week later, and they had the correct one in, and then I was happy. But yeah,
like that's a reasonable thing to be upset about. It's like, no, I can't use this.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it wasn't like I threw a tantrum or anything like that, but I know some tears were shed. It was my Dig Dug. Yes, Sharon is my sister, Logan. And yes, Sharon was there. She had literally just graduated high school, like, the previous year, so she was still at home. And our younger brother, who's since passed on, he was still there. He was there as well. And both of them jaws dropped. Just completely like, oh my god, how'd you get all these games? He's like, you're not going to believe this. But there were so many kids who had the Atari. It was just easy to go, over to their houses and play games, find games you never played before. There was a couple of guys I knew from church, of all places, who I'd go over and play Atari at their places all the time. Got to play stuff like Gyrus and Mario Brothers, and these are all games I had just never even seen until that point. A couple of guys I knew in junior high had a 2600 and a copy of Phoenix. And I fell in love with that one.
Nice one.
Yeah, Logan, sure, whatever. Yeah, so you can probably understand why I was so much of a fanboy at the time, because I really didn't know anything about the crash. I just knew games got cheap. And we bought a lot of them. I mean, when you're paying 50 cents a game, hey, in a lot of cases, you didn't even care if it was bad. I distinctly remember sometime in the late 80s going to KB Toys and finding a game called Tax Avoiders. Brand new.
Excuse me?
Tax Avoiders.
Did I? Okay, I was uncertain if I heard you correctly. Tax Avoiders.
I
Yes.
tried that just the other day for the first time. It's a very bizarre game.
It
Does
is.
it star Yoshi?
No.
No.
You
I'll never
are...
get over that joke.
Okay, here's the thing behind Tax Avoiders. You play this guy who has to climb up and down ladders trying to invest your money in stuff. And you also have screens where there's a platform in the center. And you have to jump off to the sides and pick up dollar signs while avoiding red audit signs.
What's an audit sign exactly in this context?
It looks...
A red thing.
Yeah, it looks kind of like a little @ symbol there. I can't think of the actual name. But
Ampersand.
Thank you. Yes, that.
Oh no, wait.
That's
Do you mean at or and?
At. Like
Shit.
something
Yeah.
at gmail.com.
My bad, I confused it with the and symbol. Sorry, continue.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, so you collect money as you're supposed to make $1 million by the end of the year, and you got a little calendar that counts up. So you collect this money, and then every so often it'll just throw you into the screen with all these ladders and these weird-looking little things that are supposed to be like oil and investments and stuff, but they look like a deformed Kool-Aid man, for example. Meanwhile, the evil tax man is chasing you. Turns out that this so-called evil tax man changes colors, and he's actually supposed to represent 3 different things. Like, one of them's an accountant, and one of them's the evil tax man, and one of them's something else. And they have names like Eggy. And you try and stay away from him unless he turns either green or pink, at which point you can touch him, and then your money either starts dropping or starts rising even faster. So, yeah, 50 cents. You don't want to know how much that game goes for these days. And it even tells you right on the cover of the box that the game was designed with the help of an actual IRS agent. So I guess the IRS, they'll have to climb up and down ladders all the time and stuff. They chase a big dollar sign around the office. Yeah. I can just picture all these guys chasing these giant dollar signs around the office. Yeah, Tax Avoiders. That's a hell of a game. Then there was Gopher.
Really sounds it.
Did you ever hear of Gopher? Because if you
I've
haven't...
heard of his ambition.
I think I've heard the
Wrong
name
Gopher, Mike.
Gopher. I think I've heard the name Gopher, but I don't know anything about it.
This is a game where you literally play this farmer, okay? And there's a gopher that runs around under your crops trying to eat your carrots. And what you have to do is fill in the holes that he's making, and if he pops his head out, you whack him with a shovel.
Ouch.
So this is the Caddyshack inspired game then.
That's what I'm guessing.
Incidentally, I'd like to give a shout out to the pinball table No Good Gophers, which is basically Caddyshack with the pinball table with the serial filed off.
That is arguably my favorite one Williams has ever done. Either that or Medieval Madness. So
It's real good. Like there was the talk earlier about like the announcer that just like trash talks both players. Well, now you get two announcers that trash talk you constantly.
it is a table with just oozing with personality. Highly recommend it.
It's very good.
By the way, when you hit him with the shovel, you get this really evil look, like this demonic grin on the farmer's face. And you hear the clunk and everything's like, dunk.
Man, that is vicious.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the game that Mike's avatar is from.
Fast food, as it's known as.
Yes.
I just chose this sprite because it's funny, and it's actually a game that both me and my brother found very funny. You just play as this flapping purple mouth while lots of food flies in at various speeds from the left side of the screen to the right. And all you just have to do is eat almost all the food that comes your way, and as it gets faster, a screen pops up that says you're getting fatter, which is pretty hilarious in its own right. However, you are supposed to avoid what looks like these purple pickles. I don't know if they're supposed to be anything besides purple pickles. Maybe they're eggplants. I don't know.
It sounds like eggplants. Eggplants are rather how do I describe this?
Iconic.
Position defining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know
real
they.
quick.
I know they pop up as like evil foods in several Japanese games for some reason, and there was some sort of reason behind that.
There's genuinely a reason for that in a lot of cases. It's because of oh dang it, what's his name? The guy who button mash really well in the early days.
Takahashi Meijin.
Takahashi Meijin, yeah.
Yeah. It's because he hates eggplants.
Okay, that's pretty great.
Yeah, sorry, they're actually purple pickles according to the manual.
Oh wow.
Oh, well, that's dumb.
Yep.
Although
I guess they're purple because they're toxic or something. I don't know.
I guess it is meant to be confusing because there are also normal green pickles that you can eat too. But yeah, you lose if you eat too many purple pickles, at which case text rises and falls that says burp closed. And for some reason my brother and I just found that to be the funniest shit back then. I don't know why. Just it's a very simple but very goofy game that just kind of speaks for itself, and I just like the cut of its jibs, so to speak.
You want to add some more fun to it, Mike? Here, let me read you what I just found in the manual.
Sure.
Object of the game: get fatter. Consume as many calories as you can before you get your fill of purple pickles and the snack bar closes. Let's see. Begin to binge. Press game reset. Push the red button and your feast begins. Use the joystick controller to move Mighty Mouth up and down, forward and back.
Oh, he has a name. I'll be damned.
Mighty
I didn't
Mouth.
know that.
When Mighty Mouth comes
Wow.
into contact with any food item on the screen, he eats it. It's your job to keep him away from the purple pickles. Green ones are fine. Then it says, getting fatter. You and Mighty Mouth will need a breather once in a while. The food stops coming and you get fatter. When you're done chewing, push the red button. The barrage begins again and fast food gets faster. Eat anything you can catch, but don't get purple pickles. They'll hang around at the top of the screen, giving you a bad case of heartburn. Collect 6 and you'll have to burp, call it quits. The game's over.
Yeah, no, that's a really good summation. A note for 2600 was, even if it's a relatively simple and straightforward game, you pretty much did have to read the effing manual no matter what. Some games beckon that a lot more than others, but like, of course, in the days of the 2600, you didn't get anything. Even NES and Sega Master System games would have some modicum of exposition at some point anyway. But no, here the manuals were integral, necessary for games of this time.
Especially games like, say, Raiders of the Lost Ark or E.T.
Yeah, I admit, hey, case in point, I never really bothered to figure out the manual for that one. I never actually really read the manual for that one, so I had no idea what I was doing in the game. QED, I'm betraying my own principle here, but...
I have tried to play Raiders of the Lost Ark and complete it, but I'm lost. Even with the manual.
Yeah, that's the impression I got. I'm not sure it would have done me any better good if I did actually have something of idea what I was doing in that one. So.
I finished ET. It's a lot easier.
There are some simpler games on the system, but even those, it generally helps to have some kind of reference so that you know what the different game modes are.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's a good point. Yes.
Like let me pull up one in particular here.
I can think of Space Invaders off the top of my head.
Exactly what I'm looking
at. That has
up.
over 100 game modes.
Oh.
All right, let's see.
Combat is one that comes to the top of my mind.
Space Invaders. Okay, here we go. Youch. Here's your options in Space Invaders. Basic games, alternating turns, competing at the same time, alternating shots. One player moves right, other player moves left, alternating firing and control. One player moves, other player fires. Moving shields, zigzagging bombs, fast bombs, and invisible invaders.
That's a pretty quality port to have all that additional crap in there.
And there are 112
killer app.
variations. Yes, it was.
Exactly.
That was one of the first games we ever got for the 20th Space Invaders. But
very strong conversion.
The one that really made probably one of the biggest impacts on me from that very first batch of games we got, because she got the console for her birthday, my mother did. Obviously, Combat came packed in with it. But she got a couple of games to go with it, and one of those was Haunted House.
Ooh.
And I love Haunted House. To this day, I love Haunted House. It's
legitimately one of the earliest horror games ever, even though it looks kind of goofy and cutesy from a modern perspective. But back then, all the crashing thunder and lightning set up a pretty effective atmosphere for its time.
It can be legitimately nerve-wracking at times. Like there's times when you go up the stairs and you run right into a Old Man Graves ghost or a bat or a tarantula or something like that. It's like
I have played a little bit of Haunted House, but not that in depth. I should put more time into it.
It's if you really want a challenge, try it on Game 9.
Basically, you cannot see any walls unless you're right next to them.
And everything is random.
Oh, crap.
It's a roguelike.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
But let's see. I
have played Adventure, which is amazing.
Yes. Love Adventure. Classic. And Superman is another game that I've actually been reading people that don't understand the game. But that is probably the most effective Superman game ever made, because they worked within the console's limitations to go ahead and actually give you a realistic Superman experience. You're invulnerable. You cannot be killed. You're Superman. Bullets are going to bounce off you, Yes, there's kryptonite flying around, and it will depower you. But you have X-ray vision to use. You fly at super speed. You can pick up things and rebuild them. You have to rebuild the bridge that Lex Luthor blows up. You have to go ahead and find Luthor and all of his men, put them in jail. You take the subway, you go to work at the Daily Planet. I mean, that's Superman right there. Prime could back me up on this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Atari's adventure games, they were kind of overlooked at the time, but as time has gone on, they've had a lot of respect given to them. And, Yar's Revenge, that's easy, Logan. You have to go ahead and blast or eat your way through the Kotal's shield. Touch the Kotal, that'll make the Zorlon cannon appear. And then you have to line it up and fire the cannon at the Kotal. Now, all the while, you got to watch out for the destroyer missiles. The only place you're safe from is in the neutral zone in the middle. I played the hell out of Yars' Revenge when I was younger.
Yars' Revenge is a game that when I first played it as a kid, I had no idea how to play it and didn't really get it. But then later on, when I actually learned how to play it, I now really like it, and I think it's a very strong game on this system.
And you know what it was originally intended to be?
Star Castle.
Yeah, that's crazy. Basically, Howard Scott Warshaw looked at it and said, "We can't do Star Castle on the VCS they called it at the time. We can't do Star Castle on this thing. I have another idea."
Funnily enough, years later, there would be a Kickstarter project to produce copies of an actual 2600 port of Star Castle, and I actually still have my physical cartridge of that.
Nice.
It's pretty interesting.
There were 2 different versions that were available on Atari Age for a while, but I never got either of them before the Last Chance sale yanked them out. So, oh well. But yes, Prime did back me up. Superman is so ahead of its time and never gets credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, with the batting average that Superman games have just flung out afterward, I gather it's kind of basically just the best by default. Actually, funny enough, like Richard Donner's first Superman film, it sounds like it hasn't really been surpassed in its intended purpose.
Pretty much, and they came out at the same time.
Damn.
And now Sharon mentioned Journey Escape, the game. And it's like,
oh, hey, the one with the shifty-eyed concert promoters, which are just these like large heads with bow ties and top hats whose eyes just they look like literal like living emojis, the unamused emoji in
pretty much
video game form, and that just really once again cracked me and my brother up. Little sidebar, if I may, I never unfortunately owned a 2600, but brother and I did discover it pretty early in emulation. As you can probably imagine, it was pretty easy to adequately replicate. That and, over throughout the years, there have been countless compilations of 2600 games released, mostly by Atari themselves or by Activision, who was the most prominent, what do you say, I guess third-party developer?
Party.
Yeah.
They were the original third party.
So Activision?
That's a good point, yeah. So I have gotten to experience the vast bulk of their games, and I honestly don't remember who made Journey Escape, but
that was Data
I just
Age.
Okay, so we probably got that one through emulation then, if we did from anywhere. But I just remember it was just so bizarrely unlike the arcade game. But aside from its somewhat janky opening rendition of Don't Stop Believin', I just remember that throughout the actual game there's this weird tune to just go like when you ran into something. It was oddly rhythmic, but I guess it was kind of like a sort of prototype to the endless runner genre, although you were running upward instead of left or right. But
plus it wasn't endless. You had to reach the Scarab escape vehicle to actually go on to the next stage.
Yeah, exactly. And if you didn't in time, then like the game just flipping stops, which you had to manually reset it from there. But
the goal was to get all 5
like
band
an
members.
auto-scrolling obstacle course.
Yeah,
kind of.
The objective was to get all 5 band members to the Scarab escape vehicle. So, and something else interesting about that too is that you do have opportunities to become invincible. There are your roadies who are looking out for you, who look nothing more like than giant green bugs or blue bugs, depending on what your television color looks like. And then there's the mighty manager. He looks like the Kool-Aid man with a crown. And you pick him up and nothing can touch you after that. So the only way you're going to lose a stage is if you actually overshoot the Scarab vehicle. But it's it was probably Data Age's most common game because it was probably their most famous. Honestly, they made out of the, I don't know, handful of games they made, there are only 2 that were actually any good. That and Frankenstein's Monster. Which
yeah.
It's kind of like Pitfall with a horror theme.
That's right. And I remember if you lost, then the monster itself just got bigger and bigger, and in effect meant to it like approaching your TV screen like Sadako.
Exactly.
And for the time, it was actually kind of a legitimately creepy effect, as I recall. But yeah, it also sort of faintly reminded me of. Actually, it was like the final stage in the 2600 game based off of Krull, where you had to shoot down this fortress and then slay the beast with your glaive. But well, obviously I remember Krull better than I do Frankenstein's Monster, but that was a pretty neat game.
Krull is one of my favorites too on the console. I have a lot of favorites on the console, by the way. And we haven't even really talked about Activision yet.
Yeah, no, of course there's a lot to discuss there, but...
I'm just going to say it right now. Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, best Atari 2600 game ever made.
I have that game, and as a kid, I could never figure out what in tarnation was going on with it. It was always going back to the X. It's like, okay, I understand getting to another X is a good thing, because that's a checkpoint. But beyond that, I had no idea what in tarnation I was doing. There again, to this day, I still don't actually know what the point of Pitfall is.
Well,
I don't know what the objective is.
I
just know swinging over crocodiles.
Yeah, the original
into the cave.
You want to take this one, Kate? I'll cover 2.
Sure. Interestingly, 3 out of 4 of us were actually on a Pitfall episode for the Hardcore Gaming 101 podcast earlier this year.
That's right.
I wonder which one wasn't there.
I actually brokered Rob's appearance onto that, more or less. So, yeah, that was fun. But
thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
it was a good time.
Yeah, we managed to drag you 2 and Merc onto here as kind of a trade-off, so it all worked out in the end.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, the basic objective of the original Pitfall, at least, is I think there are like 32 treasures in the jungle.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain, but I think there are 32 treasures.
Right,
and you need to collect all 32 treasures within a 20-minute time limit. And that's a very strict time limit. I managed to beat the game earlier this year, and I think I had 12 seconds or something like that left over on the clock. It's very difficult, but I think it's a really satisfying experience.
It is, and I know there's a certain way you can take underground passages and stuff that'll actually shorten your route and still let you get all the treasures.
Yeah, it's essential. Like, you cannot beat the game without the underground passages.
Yeah, I didn't know that there was like an end goal to the game at all. I genuinely thought that it was just, running and swinging, and you just kind of did that till you died for score reasons.
I was the same way as a kid. Like, my family had the game and I played it, but at the time I just kind of assumed it was like an infinitely generated experience. I didn't realize that there was an actual goal until much later.
And of course, since we're talking about Pitfall, I have to point out my avatar. And Eugene's here.
Pitfall Harry.
Hey-ho.
Hola.
A little more excited, Mike.
I mean, hey, Eugene. Sorry, I'm tired. I stayed silent for like the past 15 minutes before we got to the 2600, so I'm a little rusty. But I did want to say, even if you don't think that Pitfall 2 is the best 2600 game, it is the most advanced one by default. At least by virtue of it having many screens and its vertical scaling and constantly playing music as well.
Oh, yes.
Actually, I'm curious about that, since it was mentioned earlier. I remember bringing it up when the ColecoVision came up. The Starpath Supercharger. How would the average game for that compare with Pitfall 2 in terms of size and capability?
I would say that I can say that the supercharger allowed for a lot of technical capability that, like, the 2600 on its own could not manage. So I don't know what kind of, programming wizardry went on with Pitfall 2 exactly. But I
Right.
do know that we're talking like the supercharger added 6 kilobytes of memory, basically like multiplying what the system had to work with by, I think it was like 49 times, I think I read, something like that.
That's huge.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, when we get there, I am going to talk about Dragon Stomper and how it has music and other stuff. So,
Nice.
I'm going to say that the Star Path games are probably more technically capable, but, if you manage to pull all of what you did with Pitfall 2 without actually leaving the 2600, that's the more impressive project.
Yep.
I
And
see.
when I interviewed David Crane for Memoirs, uh, back what, late 2013, early 2014 now. I asked him a lot of questions about Pitfall 2 because I never saw that one brought up. Pitfall's been documented to death, but not 2. And he did have a few things to say about it, as far as how he made it and the music that he used. It's like the main theme in the game is actually from the cartoon, if I remember correctly. And the music that plays when you grab the balloons and float up, it's like the circus tune that you hear. It's like do 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 do.
Right.
Well, they were
Yeah, that Looney Tunes track.
and
Yeah,
Activision.
one of those public domain tracks I never freaking know the name of off the top of my head.
It's actually called Over the Sea or Over the Seas, I think.
Oh, hey.
Yep.
Cool.
But what happened is Activision's lawyers were busy looking for, the copyrights on it or whatnot, and no one could find out what that music was or where it came from. They just knew it as like generic circus music. And finally he asked his wife about it. She was a music teacher. And she's like, oh yeah, that's or Over the Waves. That's it. It's like, that's Over the Waves by some guy. I can't remember his name. And as he put it in the interview, it always pays to ask the wife. But with Pitfall 2, the goal's a little more clear cut, even though it may not seem like it. The red crosses are checkpoints, so you can't die in the game. You can just get sent back to the last red cross you touched. Your goal is to rescue your niece Rhonda and your pet mountain lion Quick Claw, both of who featured in the cartoon. And along the way, you can also find the lost Raj Diamond and pick up the prehistoric cave rat. And then you basically, if you don't lose any points, you get a perfect score at that point. So you just have to go through the caverns. I can do it in probably about 20 minutes. I've
Yeah,
mastered
when
the
I
game.
played it as a kid, I could never really figure out where I was like properly supposed to go or anything like that. It was always just kind of like, okay, let's try going this way. Oh, there's a scorpion. Let's listen to like the nasty music as I am forcibly ejected back to the last cross that I crossed. And just watch the timer or score or whatever it was just go
Very punishing.
because the more that you are in transit in this manner, the more it plummets, because it does so in real time over your incorporeal transit.
Yep. Now, I will say this. I strongly believe that was the first game I ever actually completed.
Nice.
Since most of the earlier games didn't really have an ending, it was all about the score. This one actually had an ending, but as an addendum to that, I later got to play it on the Atari 800. So I went through the game, finished it up, and as the victories playing and whatnot, and Pitfall's jumping up and down, all of a sudden I happen to notice this door opening in the rock behind Pitfall. Next thing I know, he's shoved through the door into another cavern. And I'm just like, what the hell just happened? And then the other door closed. And it turns out in the 5200 and 800 versions of Pitfall 2, and possibly some other ports, it's called the Adventurers Edition because they added an entirely new cavern. And
Nice.
there are, in the original one, you have condors, you've got bats, poisonous tree frogs, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Well, in the Adventures Edition, you have all that stuff plus rabbit bats. The frogs won't just jump back and forth from one spot to one spot. And you have, like, fire ants who are insanely fast. And what you have to do is actually collect these different pieces of something to get, and you bring it to, like, a snake charmer, and he plays a little theme on his flute, and a rope rises out of the basket, and you basically go up the rope with everything you've collected, and that's the end of the game.
That's wild.
Yeah, I was completely blown away. I never finished it legitimately. I did find 800 emulator lets you turn off collision detection, so I was able to actually map the game out and work my way through it that way, because it's hard. Now, I could go on waxing nostalgic about the 2600 for the next couple hours, but I'm going to just limit it to another couple of things. There were 4 Star Wars games for it. All of them were decent at worst, but really good at best, like Empire.
I've played Empire Strikes Back.
Death Star Battle was the other one that was really good. You fly the Millennium Falcon and you're trying to blow up the second Death Star. And other than that, there was a port of Star Wars, the arcade game, which was originally by Atari, but since Parker Brothers had the Star Wars license, Parker Brothers released the port. That one was alright. Then there was Jedi Arena, which is interesting. It uses paddles, and you basically play as one Jedi versus another one. And one of the little seekers from the original movie that Luke was training with on board the Falcon.
Oh, the remotes.
Yes. It basically floats between the two of you. You can press the fire button to go ahead and have it shoot lightning at your opponent's shield. And when he does the same to you, you try and block it with your lightsaber. But every so often, the Seeker will go nuts and just start spewing out lightning like crazy while the screen flashes, and you just have to try and deflect everything as much as you can. And Magic did a ton of great games. There was stuff like Riddle of the Sphinx, Demon Attack, Fathom, Laser Gates.
Laser Gates is a particular favorite. That's just a really damn good shoot 'em up on the system.
Yes, it is.
I have played Laser Gates on... So, when it comes to the Atari hardware that I'm most familiar with, rather than like any of the 4-digit entries, I'm going to call them.
Okay.
You know, the 2600, the 52, the 78, etc.
Yeah.
We have the at least at this point in time. I think we used to have like the 2600, but don't anymore. But we have the 800 XL, which is, a later model that, works with these things, and by my understanding is functionally like Atari's answer to the C64.
Yeah.
Because it seems to behave in roughly the same way. I remember, having manuals for like really old games, and like different versions of the game would be represented in the manual, and the ones that I looked at, I saw the one. This is mostly just to say, like, different versions of a game would look wildly differently. And every time I look up screenshots on like the C64 version of these games, it looks like the games that I played. So there's something in there. I don't know precisely what, but I think it was basically Atari's C64, basically.
Yeah, the 800 line was basically the Atari home computer line. Now,
right.
The same hardware, to my knowledge, was used in the Atari 5200, which is a system I have no personal experience with. I understand the controllers, as they stood, were absolute garbage.
Right.
And I also see that Bruno has joined us. BL85 Gamer himself is super late, but glad to see that we're on.
Welcome.
So, I played 5200 games via emulation. Yeah, they're basically identical to their 800 line counterparts.
Interesting.
But, yeah, I didn't mean to shift us off topic like that. Oh, crumb. See, like, even I forgot what my point in all of this was. What was please remind me, what was the game we were discussing before I went and did this?
Pitfall 2?
No, it was one after that.
Laser Gates.
Laser Gates, that's it.
Mhm.
Yeah, through that 800 XL and like the disk drive for it, we have a pirated version of Laser Gates.
Nice.
Hey, cool.
Yeah, I did have.
Or at least I presume it's pirated. You boot to a menu and it's just like press 1 through whatever for this set of games. And they look like, copy, like, they're like hand scribed 5 1/4 floppies.
Yeah, that's
So I'm guessing they were pirated.
sounds like it.
The sacred text.
See, most of the 800 games I played were actually on cartridge. So I remember playing stuff like Pit Stop and, of course, the Porter Pitfall 2 and BC's Quest for Tires and so on and so forth. So
Right.
it was fun while I had access to it. Getting back on the 2600, though. And yes, in fact, Bruno did mention the new fancy Atari re-release, the 2600 Plus, and Pitfall 2 will not work on it currently. Now, I'm a member of the Atari Age forums, and I've been following the threads they have over there. Atari, they have people. There's like one brand representative on there. Well, let me give you a little backstory here. Atari Age was independent up until this year when they were actually bought by Atari.
Right.
So they're working with Al now. Al's the owner of Atari Age. He's essentially an Atari employee. But they have one person who's come in. He's basically a PR guy. There's another person who's actually been hands-on with constructing the 2600 Plus. He's actually working with the people who worked on the Stella emulator to go ahead and try and ensure as close to 100% compatibility as they can. It's going to take a while and take some updates, understandably. But they're working on it. If they can get Pitfall 2 to work, I may actually get one. Until then, my 7800 will be fine.
I have a 2600 Junior myself.
The Junior. I had one of those. I had to sell pretty much everything I owned back in 2003. I called it my own personal great crash. When I decided to start collecting 2600 games again, this is back when they were still, buck a piece. I actually did get a Junior from someone on the Digital Press forums. That thing had a hell of a shock when it was in shipping. Part of the casing was broken, some of the posts on the inside. But you know what?
Oof.
That thing still fired up and ran games like it had just come out of the factory.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, a big middle finger to planned obsolescence right there. But, yeah, so the 2600 Plus, it's got its perks. You can play 7800 games on it. There are some that you need a 7800 joystick or a compatible adapter to work with because they require 2 buttons. And a lot of the homebrews don't work as of yet, but which is a shame because the 7800 got another life through all the homebrews came out. And a lot of the games that actually didn't work up until recently have been working since they've been working so closely with the Stella guys plus members of the Atari Age community. So they seem really committed to this. I guess we'll see what happens.
Neat.
But as soon as they announce Pitfall 2 works with it, then I may have to take the plunge. Just to have that whole thing going on.
Right.
I do have another 2600 homebrew that actually got when I went to Indiecade in 2019. There was the creator of the game, Dragon's Descent, which is
yes.
Yeah, I got a physical copy of that, and I had him sign it. And I tried out both the 2600 version and the 7800 version, which were playable there. And it's a really fun, maze kind of game, across multiple screens where you shoot different enemies, and it was a good time.
Yeah,
I recommend it.
He has actually done a whole series of those. Let me see.
Nice.
I can look the whole thing up right here. Let me go to the store. Because those are still on sale in the store.
Cool.
Let's see. Go to the games. All right. Oh, the game I was thinking of before that was basically an updated port of Night Stalker for Intellivision, Dungeon Stalker.
I see.
So, all right, let's see. There's Dragon's Cash, Dragon's Descent, and Dragon's Havoc. Now, I need to take
I had
a look.
no idea there was an entire line of these games.
Yep, whole thing.
That's
And
pretty cool.
Dragon's Havoc is the most recent one. It's actually a shooter.
Cool.
It's the one I'm most interested in, but let me see the other ones. And
That looks really good.
Dragon's Descent, that's the one you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a dungeon crawl in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like. And then there's Dragon's Cash. That one is basically columns. So you got a dungeon crawl, a puzzle game, and a shooter. It's great how he's able to work all this like this.
That's really cool.
I've checked out some of the threads that the creators posted on the forums, and I'd be interested in checking all these out actually at some point. But Havoc, definitely, because not that much I love shooters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't want to really touch on the 7800 all that much because it's kind of a contemporary with the NES and the Master System, and we weren't going to talk about those consoles either. But it is worth noting that the 7800 itself is backward compatible with the 2600 and plays. It actually depends on the revision of the console you have. Some games will play, some games may not play. Like, I remember seeing stickers on the ones in the stores back in the day said Activision's Robot Tank is not compatible with the 7800. That is not true. I have a copy of Robot Tank and it works fine on my 7800. Robot Tank, by the way, another excellent Activision game. If you liked Battlezone at all, this is like Battlezone plus. Best way to put it.
I do like Robot Tank. It's a pretty neat game. And Battlezone on the 2600 I think is really cool too. I think it stands apart from the arcade game to make it worth playing on its own.
I agree. They did a good job with that one.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. As far as I actually have played some Starpath games. I haven't played them recently, but I have played them. Someone actually did manage to convert them to bin files so that you can run on a emulator or a flash card.
Oh yeah, no, I would actually know about that because over on Top Games we covered Dragon Stomper on a few months back, and while I do have a hard copy, digging that out and hoping it all works, a lot of work. So
Right.
someone hooked me up with the emulator for that, and I just played it there, and yeah, I can still beat that game.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah, so the Starpath Supercharger is basically it's basically the 32X for the Atari is basically the short version to describe it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Only instead of being a tower of power, it's a cassette tape deck, if you can believe it.
I do, actually.
Yeah.
That's what they had back then.
Mm-hmm. And literally, it is a cassette with cassette ribbon and that kind of thing. Like that's the kind of technology we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a few games for it. Dragon Stomper, which is probably the best one, honestly. That was the one I definitely put the most time in. It's debatably like the first Okay, so imagine Dragon Quest, and then imagine a game like Dragon Quest, but before Dragon Quest,
I could
but
say.
after Wizardry. That's basically what Dragon Stomper ends up being. You don't control a person in such as it doesn't look like a person. It's like a little dot, and graphics are fairly simplistic, but by Atari standards, they're quite sophisticated, and the text is small. Unlike the great big, block text often seen in most Atari games and whatnot, instead the text is actually manages to be small with nested menus and like context, displays of text, which on a typical Atari you couldn't do. For those who would like a comparison, the reason for like the old gold box D&D RPGs on from like on like DOS platforms and whatnot, the reason though why they would include like books and whatnot and would tell you to refer to a page to see like what was going on, and like the Apshai games did this as well, was because they could not fit that much text in there because that was too much of a memory constraint. This game had all of its text in its own game, with NPCs stating things to you, and it's like, okay, if you want to pass, bring me the bridge pass. Bring the pass and I will let you cross the bridge. That kind of thing. So on a technical level, it's very impressive because, this is a very sophisticated RPG, all things considered. And it even has rogue elements in that various little doodads that you can pick up, like potions or crosses or that kind of thing. They will have variable effects, much in how, if you were to play NetHack, then the different colored potions are going to have effects that, are pulled from a list assigned randomly, and you have to kind of figure out what does what. It's the same thing. It does that as well.
Nice.
So it has a little bit of some rogue influence as well. And it's a 3-stage game in that the game opens up with you being in this kind of open, field area with various little things representing like houses or hovels, structures like churches and castles, and your objective at this point is to fight things to get stronger because you need to level, because otherwise you're going to get pasted, you fool. But also to acquire money so that you can purchase equipment later on. Finding any equipment that you finding any like, gear to equip along the way, swords, armor, that kind of thing. As well as find principally the bridge pass, because in order for you to actually leave this area, you need to have the bridge pass. There's a patrolling guard on the bridge that leads out of the first area, and you have the illusion of choice. You either present the bridge pass or you try to kill the bridge guard. You cannot kill the bridge guard. You forfeit your whole run. You will just die in combat as the absolute fool you are if you try this. The second phase is inside of a town with like a very dramatic like whooshing music playing, just like. And there's several stores that sell all kinds of equipment like ropes, torches, gems that have various like magical effects embedded within them. There are mercenaries that you can hire to help you in actually fighting the dragon, and like all kinds of stuff. There's spell scrolls for like detecting traps, very useful. And all kinds of things there, and with experience you can figure out what do you need, what don't you need, what is useful, and so on. And then the third phase of the game is traversing through the dragon's cave, where there are areas on the floor that are trapped, and you cannot see the trapped areas unless you've used a scroll of trap detection. And you can get harmed. You'll get harmed if you step on them, and then there's other hazards going on. There's holes in the floor, and if you just fall into them, you have a problem unless you brought ropes. And by a problem, I mean you die. And then
that's a problem.
At the very end, there is one final hole, and you need to use a rope to get down that one. and that's the one that has the dragon in it. And the dragon is asleep guarding a magic ring. And at the point that you enter in there, your mercenaries just break out and just like go and get in, just go start mixing it up with the dragon. And you can hang back and use like spell scrolls to damage it if you purchase those, or if you have managed to raise your strength sufficiently, you can just go in and start swinging at it yourself. And there's actually some decision making to make on how you want to approach actually fighting the dragon. And if you overcome it and acquire the ring, that's victory.
That's insanely complex for a 20-center game.
Uh-huh. It's really cool.
So you're right. It is like the 32X of the 20-center. It's just... And I tell you, though, I remember playing some games for it a while back. I know I played Frogger, which does stomp the Parker Brothers port into the dust. But, on the flip side of all the good 20-center stuff, there were tons, and I do mean tons, of terrible games. Show of hands, who's heard of the company Mythicon?
I have not. I do still have some more Supercharger stuff to talk about, much more briefly.
We'll jump back to that in a moment then.
Yeah, just letting you know.
Yeah, I think we'll break it up a little bit then. But yes, if you've never heard of Mythicon, consider yourself lucky.
Star Fox.
Oh, so now you're just leaving this to you're just leaving us to suffer over here.
Oh no!
In the manner of yes, you need to circulate this tape within 7 days.
No, let's just say that they released 3 games. They were bargain titles to begin with, and 2 of them are exactly the same, just with different graphics, and they're not very good. Okay, maybe there's a couple of slightly different things you do during the 2 of them, aside from just having different graphics, but essentially they're the same damn game. Actually, all 3 of them are cut from the same mold.
Oh boy.
Yeah, Star Fox, Firefly, and Sorcerer.
Star Fox, you say?
Yes, Star Fox, but not that Star Fox.
Of course not that Star Fox.
Those Firefly and Sorcerer were 2 of the games that I actually got in that duffel bag that I mentioned earlier. And honestly, I kind of have a soft spot for Sorcerer. Not so much Firefly, but Sorcerer kind of grew on me after a while. Maybe it was Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know.
That thing that doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. But there were also companies like Zonox, who did one of my absolute favorite 20-center games of all time, Ghost Manor.
Chuck Norris Super Kicks.
No, not Chuck Norris Super Kicks. Ghost Manor, damn it.
No, yeah, Ghost Manor is a good one. It's actually kind of a creepy game.
Yeah. And it was unique at the time, because you could actually select if you wanted to play as a boy or a girl.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, by using the color and black and white switch on the console. It's like if you play the girl, you rescue the boy from Dracula. Vice versa.
Not the way I'd go about it, but that is neat at the very least.
Yeah, it was certainly something that hadn't been done at the time. They also released stuff like Artillery Duel, which is also pretty fun, as long as you have a second player. It's just, it's just that game where you calculate your trajectory and gunpowder.
Yeah, the artillery game.
Exactly. But they also had
I adore artillery, incidentally. I am really into artillery.
You might like Artillery Duel. What's cool is that when you actually hit your opponent's cannon, you'll get a little parade of soldiers after that come out. Every so often, you might be lucky enough to catch them where the one in the lead keeps marching while the other 2 turn around and head back the other way, and then the other one realizes it, and he has to run to catch up with them. First time I saw it happen, I was like, wait, did that just happen? I didn't imagine that, did I? Zonox, they also had some licenses like the aforementioned Chuck Norris' Super Kicks. They were actually going to make a game based on Thundar the Barbarian, but lost the license. Wow. Ended up being Tomark the Barbarian. And geez, I mean, let's see. We've already mentioned the Magic and Activision and now Mythicon, Zonox.
I have a couple things to bring up.
Go for it.
I won't say a ton about this because I discussed this in Roundtable like earlier this year. There's this game that never actually came out, but is available as a completed prototype called Kabobber.
I figured.
It's my personal favorite game on the 2600, hands down. It would have been published by Activision had it actually released, and it did eventually become playable officially through, I think, a PS2 compilation, as well as the Microsoft Game Room service on the 360, which is how I first played it.
Yep, the PS2 Activision Classics or whatever it was called. I've got that disc.
Yeah. So it's pretty nice that it eventually got to see the light of day.
Yeah, they threw it on there with Walker.
Cool. And another game that I want to bring up is this was actually Atari published. It's so the Atari 2600 had a very long lifespan.
Oh yeah.
And it ended up being sort of contemporary with stuff like the NES even. So within that context, there's a certain game called Secret Quest, which was basically the 2600's attempt at having a Zelda competitor. I have played part of it. I think I got somewhere in the middle of stage 3 or 4. I've never beaten it, but I'd like to do so someday. It's a very fascinating attempt at making an action-adventure game on the system.
Yeah. And right around the same time, in 1989, the game Radar Lock was released. I mean, we're having 16-bit systems starting to come out, like the Genesis and whatnot.
Right.
And Atari was still releasing games for the 2600 at the time. But Radar Lock's actually like Afterburner.
Oh, wow.
And it's actually pretty good.
Pretty cool.
And there was also Solaris, too. Before we get back to the Supercharger, I do want to mention Parker Brothers had an extensive library of arcade ports, like Popeye and Q*bert and the aforementioned Star Wars games and whatnot.
Yep, I've played some of those. We have those.
Reactor, Amadar.
I actually figured out how to play Popeye.
Yeah. I've always enjoyed Popeye ever since I first played it in the arcade. So, the 2600 one was nice to have. We got it for Christmas one year. Let's see. Coleco, like I said, they'd released games for it, including, and if I'd known this existed at the time, never mind Angry Gingerbread Man. If I had known this game existed at the time, I would have begged my parents for a copy. They released Time Pilot.
Oh boy.
Oh wow, I didn't know they did that on the 2600.
They did. It's not bad. But
Cool.
I absolutely love Time Pilot, so.
Sweet.
And they also did Zaxxon, but it's nothing like the arcade game. And it's kind of like it, but. And
yeah, I've played the Atari port of Zaxxon. My father is very fond of that. I don't really understand it.
And yeah, I played a lot of it when I was younger, but it's, even compared to like the Zaxxon for ColecoVision or the SG-1000, it's like, what did they do here? They also released a lot of Exidy's games like Mousetrap and Venture.
Yep.
I got a soft spot
Mousetrap
for
is
Venture.
a Coleco game that we have. Honestly, it's the game I associate most with the ColecoVision.
Nice.
It's pretty solid.
And Sega also released some games for it. So did Konami. Sega released stuff like Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator, which, honestly, you just fly the Enterprise around shooting Klingon ships. They didn't need to include a joystick overlay for that. They released Congo Bongo, which... Yeah.
One of the comments from LDP mentioned Quad Run.
Oh, Quad Run.
Yeah, I've tried that game, and It's a little bit difficult to get the hang of because there's a lot going on with it, mechanically speaking, but I do find it fascinating and a pretty neat, unique approach to having a sorta, kinda shooter on the system.
Also, for the record, Logan, I'm pretty sure the 2600 reported Clax was only in Europe. I don't think it actually came out over here. At least not that I recall. Hell, Xenophobe made it to the 2600 as well, and that came out over here. And I think even Ikari Warriors did.
Did Name This Game and Win $10,000 come out in North America?
It did. And actually, that
Okay.
if everyone sees the octopus on the screen there, that's from Name That Game.
Yeah.
It was
Okay, that's interesting.
it was the last release by U.S. Games before they went under.
I actually tried to play that earlier today on my Mister, which is connected to a CRT TV, but it was having trouble syncing to the screen, and I wasn't sure why that was, because like it should have been a North American copy, I think, so I don't know what's up with that.
You know, I've seen something strange actually. I have a copy of that myself, which says it's North American, but you run it through a certain emulator and it comes up PAL. But yet you run it
Oh,
through
really?
run it on an actual system or through Stella, it comes up North American. It's weird.
Yeah, that is bizarre. I wonder why.
You didn't get to see the death animation though, did you?
I did play some of it. I ended up using my LCD monitor to play it. I did not get to the point where I died though.
Yeah, if you just let the shark go down and get your diver, it's hilarious because the shark will swim across the screen with the diver's legs dangling out of his mouth, and he's got a grin on his face.
Wow.
It's great.
Gotta check that out.
U.S. Games, they were another one. Speaking of name that game, they had one of my. I spent way too much time on this game. Space Jockey. It is one of the simplest shooters I've ever played, but I played the hell out of it as a kid. You basically, aliens had taken over Earth military forces. You, in turn, managed to steal one of their spaceships, and now you're fighting against your own equipment. And houses and trees, too, apparently. And hot air balloons. Oh, Double Dragon. We're not going to talk about Double Dragon. It's bad. Real bad. Kung Fu Master came out for it, though.
I take it there are other things we won't discuss as well.
Yeah, we're running short on time anyway, so...
Okay.
Forneia, if you want to go ahead and conclude with your Start Path stuff, go right ahead.
I can do that after I sneeze.
Okay. And
Bless you.
Gesundheit.
Pardon me. So yeah, some other Star Path games that we have were Escape from the Mind Master, which is basically it's a series of mazes that are static, and you just have to get to the end point without the Mind Master catching up with you and making you dead. It's kind of a BS game though, because once you hit floor 3, there's a mechanic in the game where some doors are one way, and as of the 3rd floor, there are one-way doors that lead into rooms that have no exit.
Youch.
So they just soft lock you and make you reset, and that's incredibly lame. Rabbit Transit, which is sort of a Frogger alike, but doesn't resemble it at all, really. Like, it's a side view as opposed to top down, and the kind of things that you're jumping from are much quicker, and a lot of the general objective is to, like, there's a bunch of like platforms zipping across the playfield in, like, some going left and some going right. You know, it's like having like opposing currents of platforms, and your goal is generally to just jump on all of the platforms to advance the level. And then, like, you know, hazards and stuff start showing up after the first level, and it's neat. And then there was also Party Mix, which is basically like a collection of like 5 like 2-player games that you're intended to go head to head with folks on, and neither of my parents ever wanted to play that with me, so I can't comment on really any of them.
Darn.
Oh well. Before we close out,
There's a reason why Dragon Stomp is the best one on on this machine.
I don't know. That Frog Report's pretty damn good. But I have a couple of final things to say. But before I go into that, does Kate or Mike, would you like to add anything else?
I've already mentioned a couple games that I really like. I guess as far as Activision goes, we haven't really talked much about River Raid, which is
No.
another really great game from them.
And yes,
And
it
they've
is.
also got several other things as well that are interesting, like Keystone Capers and
Yep.
whatnot.
Stampede, Laser Blast,
Oh yeah, I
Ghostbusters.
love Stampede.
I'm
For sure.
I'm quite fond of Mega Mania myself.
Yes, Mega Mania.
Good old space cheese, space dice.
Oh yeah, all Activision did mainly quality anyway. So
I was out for a little bit. Did you mention Yar's Revenge?
yeah, we talked
Yeah.
a bit about that.
Yeah, that was discussed.
Earth's Revenge is great.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely, still a classic. Just so zen in its mostly black screen simplicity.
Yes, but Warshaw did such a great job on it. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeet.
Now there were 2 more games I wanted to mention. One being really bad and one being surprisingly good.
All right.
Have you ever heard of a game called Coconuts?
No.
Yeah.
I
Coconuts.
think I've heard of that one. I think we may have that one, but it's not one I ever played a lot.
Oh, Coconuts. You play as a character named Stanley, I presume. I'll let that sink in. And you're armed with a hat and a blue umbrella. What you're trying to do is capture an ape named Coco, except you never actually get to the capturing part. He will jump around between 2 palm trees and drop coconuts on you. Now, at first, they're very easy to dodge. Every so often, though, you get to a certain score and he'll stop moving for a second, and he'll start to vibrate. You press the button, and he takes off, throwing him even faster. Let me just say that I've actually had played that game so much as a kid that at one point it looked like someone had shoved a jackhammer up his ass and turned it on full blast. He was just... And it was like, okay. And
Okay, honey, that's enough meth now.
exactly. But you get hit once, you lose the umbrella. You hit twice, you lose the hat. You hit third time, game over.
I like how our health pool is represented in Arthur principles.
Exactly. So, Coconuts, not a good game, but I actually had fun playing it back in the day.
Yeah, that's not the one I have, so no.
Well, the other game I wanted to mention, anyone who knows me knows that the main reason I watch It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown is because of the Snoopy and the Red Baron sequence.
Are you going to mention Barnstormer?
Barnstorming is really good. That's another Activision game. But I hadn't planned on it, but now that you mention it, yeah, I love Barnstorming. But they actually made a game based on Snoopy and the Red Baron. And it's fun.
Oh.
You play as Snoopy on top of your Stop with Camel doghouse. And it looks just like, for Atari, it actually looks like you're Snoopy on top of a doghouse.
No.
And
Oh, there we go.
the story is that the Red Baron has stolen all the Allies' treats, and you have to get them back by dogfighting him. So you're flying
I think
around.
I've heard you mention this before. Now that you mention it, yeah.
The games are so fun because, the Baron will come down, he'll fire at you, and what I always thought was a really cool thing was that you'd actually see a line of bullet holes appear in the side of the doghouse every time he hit you. Like, hit you once, you get one black pixel be a bullet hole. You get a whole row of them going all the way down, and you're shot down. Might as well just shake your fist and shout, "Curse you, Red Baron."
Yeah, that's pretty true to the source material. I think that's exactly how it gets represented in, the comics and the show. It's like it's just a line of bullets down the side of,
Yep,
in a diagonal line down the side of the
that
doghouse.
that's
Yeah.
exactly how it is. What the Baron will do, though, is occasionally fly up into the clouds, and then he will go ahead and drop one of the treats. If you catch it, great. If you miss it, too bad. So, and every time you shoot down 3 red Barons, you'll go to a screen where it tallies up all the treats that you managed to get, and as well as showing how many squadrons of red Barons you've shot down. So it's neat. He'll also occasionally drop skull and crossbones. You pick those up, that's instant death.
Don't do this.
Yeah, and it's just a fun little one-on-one shooter. It's one player only, so you can't actually have a second player be the Red Baron. But I spent a lot of time with that game back in the day.
Neat.
And yes, Prime, I can guarantee that you would have put hours into that game. It was the only Peanuts game to come out. They planned Good Luck Charlie Brown, but that never made it past prototype. And it was one of those that had a unique label, too. It was like a red and black grid. Which they were also Disney games. Well, they released at least one, Sorcerer's Apprentice, that had the same kind of label, but it was blue grid. And they did some Muppets games. Like, I think it was like Big Bird's Egg Hunt or something like that. And Pigs in Space.
Pigs in space.
Yep. And like in one stage, you actually played Captain Link, whatever his name was. Link
Hogthrob.
Hogthrob, thank you. Captain Link Hogthrob, and you're shooting down chickens as they come down like Space Invaders. There's another where you play Miss Piggy and you're doing something. And another where you play Dr. Strange Pork and you're flying the swine trek. It's a neat little game.
That's pretty great.
But I know the ones specifically designed with the Sesame Street Muppets in mind were basically kids games. They came with a special kids controller, which was just a repackaged Atari touchpad. That's one thing we didn't touch on were the different controllers that the 20 Center had. There were the paddles, which were great. There was the driving controller, which you could use with Indy 500, and that was it. And then there was the touchpad, which you needed for games like basic programming. But they also released another one when they put out Star Raiders for the system, which had a little overlay you could put in everything, and you could press a button, turn shields on and off, turn your computer on and off, go to hyperspace, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think Logan's talking about Mangia right now. Says there's also another really bad 20 Center game. I just remembered where your mom makes spaghetti, and the objective is not to force feed your kid to death 7 style. But yeah, I think that's Mangia. Or Mangia or something like that. Also, let's not bring up Froggo games either. They're just... The less said about Froggo, the better.
I don't know what that is.
Couldn't if
and
I
won't
wanted to.
ask.
It's a game company that brought out games for the 2600 and a couple for the 7800. And the best thing I ever saw about them was a review of one of their 700 games, which consisted of one line: "Go away, Froggo."
Well then.
Yes. So we just scratched the surface with this roundtable. There's plenty of stuff to discuss. But
Yeah, there's literally thousands of games on the 2600 alone.
and there's still a thriving homebrew scene for it.
Exactly.
So it's just crazy how after 40 years this thing is still going so strong. And Atari realized that when they brought out the 2600 Plus. It's like, there's still people out there who love this thing. And
Definitely.
hopefully they'll get it working at 100% capacity at some point. It'd be nice anyway. That all said, I do want to go ahead and give a special thanks to Earl, who was with us for the first hour, telling us all about the Odyssey 2.
Thank you, Earl.
It was fascinating, yeah.
As you can see, I just put his icon back in the middle there. his avatar, as it were. Pickaxe Pete from the Odyssey 2 game of the same name. Little other business. Probably the last stream for the end of the year. We're going to come back probably with another hot take stream. Plus, we have a couple others we're planning. And when I say a couple, I mean like 50. It's just had to put that out there.
I definitely have my own hot takes.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to get you in on that one. There's a couple people lined up who want to do some hot takes. So I think if we end up doing 5 people, each with 2 hot takes, that's probably going to work the best to get some special guests besides the regulars.
5 people with 2 hot takes sounds implausible unless we have like several hours more time than usual.
Well, we usually
I'm
do
just
3.
over here going like, what do you mean I'm limited to 2?
That's not to say you can't come back during future hot take streams. This is a recurring thing. Bruno, go to your room. On the book front, I have to say there's actually progress. As it turns out, I have to actually reformat them into a smaller portrait size, kind of like the traditional paperback novels you might be used to seeing. So I'm in the process of doing that. You can expect something to actually start happening after the first of the year. I've been talking with the publisher. We're going to get the ball rolling on this. So, yeah, just wait for an announcement for that. And I haven't mentioned, but after taking a week's break, there will be new Dyer and Bette videos starting this Wednesday.
Yeah.
So we've got some fun ones in store, too.
I'm happy for that.
Yes. So we're going to work on logistics for the hot takes roundtables from here, see what we can do. But until then, hopefully, we will see you all in 2024. And I hope everyone has a good holiday season. And check out the videos when they start premiering this Wednesday. And you'll see Bette and I back in our usual back and forth.
Happy holidays.
Yep. And to everybody who was here, Forneia, Kate, Mike, thanks for sticking around these past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully,
yeah, years, plural.
Yes, we're in year 2 now. So hopefully,
I meant as far as my involvement goes.
Well, you've been here since the Retro RPG stream. Those started last year sometime.
Did it? Wow.
2022, yeah.
I feel like that was still like early this year.
Nope. I don't think it was.
Oh, wow.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
It was 2023.
Then I am wrong.
I mean, we only have like a couple weeks left of 2023, but technically.
My memory is Swiss cheese sometimes, too, so. Here's hoping I'm alive to see 2024. I've been to the hospital more often than I care to be recently. Just one trip, but still, that's more than I prefer going to the hospital.
Understandable.
Yeah. So, all right. So we will catch you next year then. So, everybody have a fun.
Bye.
See ya.